I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Easthampton Planning Board for Tuesday, February 20th, 2018. You guys want to open your meeting too?
I have a motion to open our public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Word.
All right, couple quick administrative things because this is a regular planning board meeting too. So is there anyone here to speak to anything that's not on the agenda tonight? Excellent. And quickly, our planning board minutes for December 5th and January 16th. Did you guys have a chance to look at those?
Yes, sir.
Any errors, omissions?
No.
No.
I motion to approve the minutes from December 5th, 2017 and January 16th, 2018.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? All right. Jamie, no A&Rs tonight?
No, no.
Excellent. So we'll move on to the public hearing. Recreational marijuana zoning amendment, Easthampton Planning Board and City Council Ordinance Subcommittee joint public hearing on the proposal to amend the Easthampton zoning ordinance to include a new ordinance section 10.10, recreational marijuana. So before we get started, there was a discussion, I guess a proposal from the ordinance subcommittee that would do a list of, a sign-up list for speakers. Does the planning board have any objection to that, or?
No.
No? Okay. So I'm going to circulate this. If you would like to speak, if you could sign up, that would be great. We haven't had a problem in our prior meetings with too much talking. I don't expect that'll be a problem. If we can try to keep things sort of brief and not repetitive, that would be great, but I know everybody's got things to say, and I don't want to cut anybody short, so hopefully we can actually do this in a time-effective manner and go from there. Hopefully we won't have to put a limit on anything. I think the best way to start is to go through the two drafts. Is that a good idea?
Yeah. And do you want me to start by just
Yeah.
highlighting some of the pieces of the new
Sure.
version?
So just to clarify for everyone, if you haven't seen, so the planning board had several months of public hearings. We resulted in a draft ordinance, which was submitted to City Council and then was sent back to the ordinance subcommittee. The ordinance subcommittee has drafted their own version, making some changes, some minor, some major to ours, and we're gonna sort of hash those things out here and talk about them, and then I guess the planning board formally just proposes what our draft to submit to the city council is, and then the city council will have further hearings and finalize the ordinance. So I guess Salem, if you want to talk sort of about some of the changes and where they came from, that'd be great.
Yes, no problem. So we too have had public hearings. We've had 3 to date. And basically looking at the draft that the planning board put together, which I just want to say I appreciate the work that you all did. I thought that as I looked through ordinances from a lot of different places, it had a lot of good depth and a lot of content. There were some areas that as we came through some of our public hearings, we wanted to make some changes to make it more suitable for the city of Easthampton. So first of all, the purpose has changed. Just I don't know if anybody noticed that. I'll just read it. The purpose of this section is to regulate the time, place, and manner of cannabis establishments. The zoning will serve to preserve the character of the community and create a place for residents to responsibly have access to legal cannabis while mitigating community impact. This ordinance should serve as a guide that will support the citizens' right to access legal cannabis, protecting the public interest, and expanding new growth for the tax base. So that is the new purpose, the updated purpose. The scope stayed the same basically, which was just pulled from, I can't remember which part of, it was the second part of underneath the purpose of the planning boards. Then as definitions went through, basically, we took the word marijuana out and we replaced it with cannabis. So you'll see for the purposes of this document, the word cannabis is used in place of marijuana as found in the Mass General Laws, Chapter 94G. And the commission is actually thinking of doing that anyway. So.
And can you explain a little bit the basis for that language change?
In the 1900s, when in Texas, when cannabis first started coming over the border with Mexican immigrants, it was one of the ways that the people who lived in Texas that didn't want Mexican immigrants to come there was to brand them and the recreational substances they used as bad. So cannabis at that time was in almost all tinctures, cough syrups. It was widely used in the 1800s as a medicine. And this new word marijuana came out. People didn't recognize it. They didn't know what it was. And that was basically the basis of prohibition, the first basis. So it basically is a historical reference to the racism that started Prohibition. So I think that's important to recognize.
Okay.
As you see, there are some different definitions than the planning board had. These definitions are pulled from the state regs that were in draft form. Just a couple things that were added. I added in the definitions community host agreement, which wasn't in the definitions before. Adult on-site social consumption operator. So just a little bit of a semantic change to make sure that people understand that this is for adults 21 up.
Where is that?
It's on the under J,
J.
under 10.10.3.
Gotcha.
And then place is something that we talked about. There's two main points of contention that we experienced in our public hearing process. Those 2 points were a buffer zone, which in the planning board's version was 200 feet, and the number of cannabis establishments. So you can see in A, we, and this was an executive call on my, since we didn't really have time to discuss it, we kind of briefly discussed it at our last meeting. But I think that compromise is a good thing. And I think that when working with all parties involved, all stakeholders, it's an act of good faith to try to find a common ground is important. So you can see that cannabis establishment shall be located within 350 feet of a school as opposed to 200 feet, which was in the original, which is, basically there was calls for a 500-foot buffer, which would take out a majority of, 90% of downtown business. And I remember coming to planning board meetings where that had been debated, and we debated it, and it seemed important to not exclude 90% of downtown business.
Mm-hmm.
So in that compromise, it gives us about half of, a little less than half of Union Street and about half of Cottage Street. And it protects the school from having a business that is in close proximity. That was a compromise that we placed in here. And you can, just trying to think, we also limited it to cannabis retail storefronts, no more than 4 in the first year. So originally it was just a number of 12, I think, from the planning board. We decided to, as people were calling for a kind of a incremental approach, we thought, again, compromise is a good thing. We're willing to compromise. So we decided to look at 4 cannabis storefronts the first year and 4 adult on-site consumption businesses for the first year. And then the second year can be revisited, but as it stands, and this can be something that we talk about, is for the second year and for both. It basically gives us a buffer period to see if things are working out. If they're not, we could reduce that before the second year comes up, or we could increase it, or whatever we need to do.
So actually, can you just walk through again the retail versus social consumption and the year? It's kind of all jumbled together here, and the years and how.
So
increments.
4 brick and mortar storefront dispensary-like businesses the first year, and then 4 adult social consumption first year.
And are we talking calendar years? So is that 4 through December
July
31st?
July 1st.
Okay.
Which is when these come on.
Okay.
So from July 1st, 2018 to July 1st, 2019.
Correct.
4 applications can be approved.
Correct.
Okay.
Is that fiscal 19 then, instead of 2018, or?
The reason it's July 1st is
clarify
because
that?
that's the timeline of the CCC.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we should just clarify how we would clarify it's actually 2018 to 19 and 19 to 20.
Right.
But
Well, we can.
talk
Yeah, I mean,
Could
we're
add
gonna,
that
some of
in.
the language tweaks like that, we're
Sure.
definitely have to do.
Yep. And then if you wanted to create an independent testing lab or something like that, there wouldn't be a limit on how many of those we have. Those are low-impact businesses.
And nothing after 2019, or does it
That's-
free for all in 20 and 21?
It's that's something that we can discuss,
Okay.
but and to be determined, really.
Okay.
With the state limitation, I mean, there's a limitation that they allow us to have based on liquor stores.
20% of our, yeah, exactly.
So it's good to keep in mind.
No, that 20% is only, that's if you
We
want
go
to.
below it, we have to.
Correct, we
Oh,
have
right.
to enact a ballot to go
Right, right.
below
I
20%,
don't think
but
there's a
there's no,
top end.
there's no explicit limit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the market would probably dictate a top end, but
Yeah, at some point, although.
at
it
some
may-
point. So, but that is, I mean, at this point, this is something that we can discuss.
Okay.
Like I said, this is, we haven't really had much time to deliberate these two pieces, but these were the contentious pieces that we were trying to find compromise on.
Okay.
So,
Social
Oh.
consumption.
social consumption
Yeah, for the first year and
for the second year. Yep. And then basically it says where that everything would have to be by special permit of the planning board. Any cannabis establishment. And then F, which is what you guys have in front of you, the addendum, is something that we discussed as wanting to make sure that we preserve, we don't want to have a row necessarily of cannabis establishments. And so so you can see that F of 10.10.4, no cannabis establishment of the same type shall be within, and this is to be discussed, 50 to 200 feet in the downtown or highway business zones, or 500 to 1,000 feet in the mill industrial or industrial zones. So that means that you basically, if you wanted to have a dispensary, have to be at least a certain number of feet away to open up another one of the same type. But you could have a dispensary and a yoga studio that was a secondary use.
Are you suggesting a range for us to hone in on a number?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting.
And
Would
then,
you, and I realize you guys haven't talked about this really either, but do you imagine that when you say same type, that where you have sort of the mixed use concept where you could be a dispensary and an on-site consumption or something like that, that would be its own type?
It would be
that
its own
would
type.
count as both?
That's a good question. I think because you have the idea of the micro business.
Right.
I think that is something that we could discuss, but I think that we don't want to be overly lenient or overly restrictive, so I think that that's an area that we should look at, for sure.
is this only for retail or for all types?
This is for all types of the same. So if I have a cafe and you want to open up a cafe next door, you'd have to be at least a certain distance away from me.
So this includes production, cultivation,
And-
testing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Or even like manufacturing or things like that, okay,
Yep.
It's anything under the definition of F, cannabis establishment.
Yep.
okay.
And then you can see that, these are actually consistent with the planning board's odor. So making sure that no cannabis establishment shall allow the escape of noxious odors, and they should have odor control technology provisions and ensure that they do not violate MGL Chapter 1111, Section 31C signage. Shall comply with the commission regulations, which are fairly stringent, and Section 10, our sign ordinance, which is being revised. Hours. This is a little bit different than yours. So one of the pieces of input we got, I think, from Councilor Coniff was maybe in downtown business, they don't need to open up at 8 in the morning. So we looked at in a time of 8 to 11, and in downtown business, it will be restricted to 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. And then this is new, and this was something that hadn't been really thought about before, but for adult on-site consumption, last call will be at 11, and closing time will be at 1. So, which will give people time to, not be intoxicated. So visual impact. Marijuana plants, products, paraphernalia shall not be visible from outside the building in which the cannabis establishment is located. So they can't have, things in the window that are showing the types of products they sell. The signage is going to be controlled by the commission, which is fairly stringent. So they can't use cannabis leaves or anything like that. If you've driven by Netta in Northampton or seen INSA in the mill, it would be a similar look, which is pretty nondescript.
How does that get reconciled with the sort of partially enclosed deck language that you have?
Well, that's a visual impact. So a partially enclosed deck would be a deck where it's enclosed except on the roof, so you wouldn't be seeing into it.
Okay, so partially mean it's closed from the sides, but
Yes,
not from above?
not from above.
Okay.
So, and then again, you guys had home occupation, that's still in there. Added a little bit to the adult on-site social consumption. So, no cannabis retailer shall allow social consumption except in accordance with the section. And the applicant for a special permit to operate an adult on-site cannabis social consumption establishment shall identify with particularity the physical space where social consumption will be allowed to occur, expected days, hours of operation, measures to be taken by the applicant, cannabis retailer to mitigate the risk that a customer may operate a motor vehicle in a condition impaired by cannabis consumption, which also the commission is also, requiring on-site consumption to have agreements with like Uber, Lyft, taxi services as part of the condition of their license. Measures to prevent entry by persons under 21 years old. That means for on-site consumption, you cannot enter unless you are 21. The granting of a special permit or the imposition, I guess I don't have to read all this. This was some language that just basically lines it up with the state regs. And nothing, so just be aware that as it stands, there's no, as far as my understanding is, there's no smoking, the combustion of cannabis allowed. And so if, I think one of the things that I've heard is people think that there's gonna be smoke pouring out into the street, or there's gonna be, areas where people are going to be exposed. Remember, part of this ordinance is the odor control, the no noxious odors. And also, the commission is not, as far as I know, is not allowing the combustion of cannabis for on-site consumption. So there will be no smoke of pouring out of doors. There will be no, because basically what this says is, it's going to be applicable to the smoke-free workplace law, general laws, chapter 270, section 22 as amended. And then this is something that the CCC has not decided if they're going to, how they're going to do this, but similar to a one-day alcohol permit, special cannabis-related public events shall be in accordance with Chapter 94G of general laws and limited to mill industrial downtown business, regulations promulgated thereunder, and policies may be promulgated by the planning board. So if they do decide to do that, then you will have the authority over it. Security, big change to security really is everything was the same from what the planning board had, except safety plans should mitigate any potential harm to employees and public, including ensuring all customers are 21 plus. These plans shall be kept private between the city and the establishment, out of the public record for the security of the establishment. Because that could be a gaping hole if they were part of the public record and someone who wanted to do harm to that business got a hold of those security measures. Another thing that we added at the request of the planner, who has not started yet, but did mention this, was no person shall operate a cannabis establishment without having a license in good standing from the CCC. The license should be granted by the CCC before final approval is given for the planning board special permit. So that means they would have to have in their hands their approval before the final approval of the special permit is granted. Now, there could be a chicken and the egg thing here.
It's catch-22, it can't happen.
So I think the key here is if the final approval is contingent on having the special permit, then that would overrule. So we just need to figure out how to say that. Basically, we want to make sure that they have the process started, that they're on their way, that they've worked with you and the commission to jump through all the hoops. So.
And then we're getting final documents. I think that's the other concern, right, is we could sort of get the kind of preliminary stuff.
Right, that you know exactly what they're being granted for, and then you can issue the special permit. And so I think that, like I said, we need to figure out whether that's chicken and the egg, but the intent is to basically give us a little bit more control. Energy use, this was a piece that, after talking to specifically INSA, they said that they would have to go out of business in order to meet the 75% generation of 35% on-site. And so that there should be an energy use plan that demonstrates best practices for energy conservation. Plan shall include electrical system overview, proposed energy demand, ventilation system, air quality, proposed water system, and utility demand. And then you guys, the line Q plan is the same. And the final part of this is that nothing in this bylaw shall be construed to regulate the cultivation of industrial hemp, as it's non-psychoactive. And that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, so just as a big picture question, we've gone back and forth on this, and I know there's been some disagreement, but at least the opinions that I've seen have all said that we need a ballot question for on-site consumption. And if we haven't gotten an opinion from town council on that, because I know the AG's office, I was at a seminar with them, and there was a representative from the CCC there that also said that that's what they're advising towns. So I don't know if we've got an opinion from town council or if there's a reason we haven't.
So I would say that Jack probably wouldn't be able to render an opinion on that yet. And this is something that is going to be decided by the CCC, and depending on who you talk to on the commission, you will get a different answer. So I think the intent of the law would be communities that passed it in a majority would be allowed by right. And the intent of the ballot bypass was for communities that had a lot of resistance on the planning board or on the council, and were not able to get them to create regulations that would allow them to operate under a special permit, and so it would force it by ballot. And so, but here's what I have found out. I have asked, does it hurt us in any way to leave the adult on-site consumption in the ordinance? And if the CCC, and it doesn't make our ordinance null and void. It doesn't change anything other than the CCC will not issue a license for that particular piece, and we would go back and amend that section to say per ballot.
Yeah, I mean, that's the
Initiative.
only part that, I think the confusion, I mean, we're always trying to get these things so they're clear to an applicant. I
Right.
mean, it's online. I mean, if you have a provision that says on-site consumption is permitted, but the law says we can't, you get people that invest time and money in a project and then find out they can't.
They have to apply to
It
both
just,
anyway.
it just seems like, I mean, it's a clear legal question. I don't know why we wouldn't be asking town council for an opinion on that.
Well, because I think the answer to that question lies at the top.
The commission can't even give us a straight answer on it right now.
Right.
When you read the language, there's
very
no
unclear.
hesitation at all. It's completely clear that we can do it.
Yes.
It says, the
You-
city council of the city and the board of selectmen of a town shall, upon the filing with the city or town clerk of a petition, signed by not fewer than 10%, and then goes on to they have to enforce the vote. It doesn't say anything about we can't zone for it. It just
Right.
says that you guys have to respond if you receive a petition to enforce the vote. It was meant to make sure that if you're recalcitrant and don't want to do it, you still have to do it.
Right. Which
That's what it
is
says
what we've
specifically.
heard
I get
from.
that I'm just, like, the Attorney General's municipal law unit disagrees, right?
Right.
And so that gives me
Political.
pause.
Yeah.
Well, but
language
it
is
is
clear.
the head lawyer of the state of Massachusetts, so I mean, it gives me some pause as someone to take a step where the AG's office says this is not legal, to then do that without at least an opinion from town council that says it's undetermined, or
The
you're
laws say
okay,
a city
or.
or town may adopt ordinance and bylaws that impose reasonable safeguards on the operation of marijuana establishments, provided they are not unreasonably impracticable and they're not in conflict with this chapter or with regulations made pursuant to this chapter. We have the ability to do it. The other language in there that talks about the vote says nothing about our ability not to do it. Where's the problem?
Well,
There
and
isn't.
I
I
think
just
that
don't know why we wouldn't ask town council. I mean, if
think we
town
can.
council says that, then that's
Yeah.
that, but I mean,
I think we can, and I think, I mean, from what I heard that, they're using the language from the petition, the original petition, to kind of guide this, and the intent of that was for the towns that were apprehensive to pass it, to do anything, and that was the kind of the safety valve for citizens who wanted something to happen. So I mean, I agree. There's definitely some politicalization going on
sure.
here. So I'm confident that the CCC will be issuing a guidance on that shortly. I think this is one of their biggest outstanding questions.
yeah.
So, but like I said, if we leave it, this is something I think that if anybody's following, if you were thinking about creating a business, this would not be something that you were just like, oh, like you wouldn't be paying attention to the fact that the state hasn't given the final go-ahead yet. So I don't know if it creates undue confusion, but I think that it doesn't necessarily hurt to leave it for now.
Anybody else up here have any comments or?
I do have a
Owen,
question.
you wanna?
Go ahead.
Is there an ordinance in Easthampton that absolutely forbids the opening of a private club where smoking is allowed?
I do not believe so.
So would
Didn't
it
one
be
just open?
possible for a private club to be opened that allowed smoking of marijuana on site?
I know that they're proposing that in Worcester, and we do have a private club in the city that allows cigar smoking.
Well, and there's a Portuguese American club or Polish American club or something in Ludlow that has, the banquet facility is no smoking, but the bar, you can hardly breathe in there. So I was just curious if we actually had an ordinance that forbade the formation of a private club where smoking is allowed.
First question is this additional 10.10.4 where it says no cannabis establishment of the zone type shall be within 50 to 200 feet, and we're gonna determine that, in the downtown business or highway business zone, or 500 to 1,000 feet in the mill industrial, zoning districts, or industrial zoning districts. Is that by walking? So for example, a hypothetical that I've heard is I'm gonna open a business, I share a wall with another establishment of the same thing, but we are in the mill building, and to get to that other building, I've gotta walk down this hallway, out the door, down across the door, and walk in, so it's 2,000 feet, but
Typical
actually we
path of
share a
travel.
wall. Typical path of travel.
Typical
So
path
we
of
have,
travel.
we'll have to clarify that.
Yep.
In the language. All right, so the 350 feet. If someone comes in and says, hey, I found this great building in downtown business and it's 340 feet, we say no. Or is there a provision for a variance?
It could be similar to alcohol, we have to notify.
Yeah, I mean, so
The waiver discussion probably should happen about applying for a waiver as a possibility throughout this whole thing. As you come before the board for your special permit, maybe you're offering something else, that something could be waived. I know that Jeff mentioned that in his
Yeah.
document, and I think that might resolve that.
and yeah, I
Part of the problem with a waiver in general is that it sort of gives like uncertainty to the process, right? And so there's discretion that sort of, there's no check on who we give waivers to and who we don't. We can decide to keep it at 350 or drop it to 300 or hold it to whatever. So like, I'd rather come up with something that we're comfortable with and have a number like that,
And lock it
personally,
in.
just because I think that you get fuzzy trying to figure out how a waiver process is applied for something that's like that. And I don't know what the logic would be where we think 350 feet is appropriate here, but over there 340 is good enough.
So then the follow-up question, what is the zone for alcohol establishments to schools?
there is none.
And what is the zone for cigarettes sales to
There is none.
schools? So
Well,
why?
I think there is, under the licensing for new establishments, for at least for bars, right? I mean, for putting in a new bar, I think there's a buffer.
Well, I mean, if there is a buffer, then Maple School, which has a package store within 50 feet.
Right, but so,
Which
but
sells
I think,
tobacco.
so that's the problem with the alcoholic stuff, is that I think that the current requirements post-date the businesses, right? So
Grandfather.
it becomes, I mean, when you
Right.
look around town, it's essentially, there is no buffer, but I believe, when we heard at
So-
one of our hearings, we were told that there's, I think it's a 500-foot buffer for schools to bars,
If a
when
new
it's a
bar
new
is
bar is
still in
open.
Yeah, but
When was
that's
that
actually- hold
introduced?
on.
When was that introduced?
I don't know.
Well, I can give you
I know
the
what it
full
is, but I
details on
don't
this.
know.
So I did a lot of
Place.
research on buffers,
Maybe consider new bars.
and it's actually Rule 16D for pubs and
saying.
drinking establishments. It's not a 500-foot buffer. It's a 500-foot notification area for schools and churches. And so that means that if you are going to open a bar, then you're required by law to notify the school as an abutter as part of the special permit process. And then it's basically you're inviting them to come take part in the process to determine if they're going to be, unduly impacted by that establishment. It is not a restrictive buffer, and so when the CCC took their buffer, not a requirement but a suggestion, they took it from 16D, but they left out the part of it's a notification requirement, not a prohibitive requirement. So I think that's important to understand as well. And again, I'm not gonna. My personal opinion on buffers is that I have not seen any evidence that they do anything. And I feel particularly, you know, hindsight's 20/20. However, you know, equity does mean something, and we do, our schools, unfortunately, the Pasquama Club is literally a direct abutter of Center School. Like, someone could go in there, drink all day, get out in their car, press their foot on the gas and go through the fence into the playground. It's a direct abutter. And then, you know, the Pizza House package store is literally 100 feet away. Honestly, and if we're going to get into buffers, are we going to create buffers for junk food? Which, you know, obesity is a tremendous problem for our school-age children. You know, I think when I look at Dunkin' Donuts and the signage they have there, that's equally as disturbing. So I'm not a huge fan of buffers, and I am a huge fan of equity. However, I do feel like compromise means something, and when you have people that are concerned, it doesn't hurt to, you know, see it from their side and take a moderate stance. So that's where the 350 came from.
Okay. And then the last thing we just should keep discussing, and I don't have an answer yet, is the years, because if we're going to just do this for 2018-19, what happens when something closes or closes up shop? That makes that position open again. So we got to just work on how we're going to modify that language so it's able to be consistent for future years.
I'd like to take a quick peek at 10.10.1, the purpose.
Yes.
I saw the word residents in there. I thought perhaps that might be better to be the public.
Okay. I agree with that.
I have a real issue, and I think that we'll definitely need to look at the catch-22 that we were looking at before, the license in good standing, because I know the CCC requires, for the part of their licensure, that our end be covered.
Right.
They're expecting us to be done. So we
Okay.
can't be waiting on them while they're waiting on us, because then they'll go into a loop and
Sure.
nothing will ever happen. So
Sure.
we have to be real careful.
So that was a suggestion from the new planner.
Right.
But I'm happy to, if we think that that's gonna
Well, I think we need to find a way.
work it away.
Yeah, because I think the key will be, maybe it's just requiring that when they apply to us, that it's with their final application that they're gonna submit to the CCC or something like that. But, yeah, I had the same thought, that I know that we have to sign off on that before they apply, or
Right.
as part.
I liked your idea about having the application they made, maybe not the final approval from the CCC, but just some materials in advance. I think if we could come up with something like that, that'd be a better. 10.10.5C hours. Closing time will be, I'd like to make that no later than 1 a.m.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're forcing them to close at
Okay.
1, and they might not want to stay open.
Fair enough.
I have more, but we'll deal with that when we get to it.
Actually, I had one more. 10.10.63, which requires that when the person is coming up to us to apply, they have to come up with measures to be taken by the applicant to mitigate the risk that a customer may operate a motor vehicle in a condition impaired by cannabis consumption. Do we require that of bars?
No.
And how are we going to legislate that? How are we going to make sure they're doing that once they open up? Are we going to ask them for their lift, how many times they called lift that week, or?
Maybe they just have to demonstrate a plan.
I think the plan, this is for the special permit, so they're demonstrating how they're gonna do this.
So they're just
To
going to
meet your
say,
requirements.
if someone looks intoxicated, we're going to call them an Uber.
Yep.
Well, and this is the training program, like they do training for like bars and package stores and stuff where you get certified, like, so I presume that's what you would come to, you're an applicant, this is the training we're gonna do for our employees, this is when we'll determine that we're not gonna serve someone. But, we don't have enforcement authority to
Yeah.
be in there, but that's true for a lot of the things that we
For
rely
everything,
on.
everything, actually.
Just
about
most of what we
except
do.
for signs, yeah,
Yeah.
which we also can.
Yeah.
All right.
Where you discuss escape of odors, I didn't find that.
That would be 10.10.5A.
So what I would recommend replacing odors with odors and gases, and it's still under debate whether there will be actual smoking permitted in social consumption spaces, but I think that addresses the concern of enforcement as to whether smoke will actually be coming out as well.
Okay.
Or in, vapor.
In that same section at the end, it says chapter 1,111. I think it's actually 111. Yes, I've done a little too much reading.
Could be a typo, but.
Yeah, Harry.
I'd like to look at 10.10.6, D underneath there. Can somebody explain to me exactly what that means?
The derogate.
About the smoke?
The smoke-free workplace?
Yeah, what exactly does that mean?
That's a great question.
It means
I
you
have no
can't
idea.
trump the smoke-free workplace law. It means
Okay.
that takes precedence. You must
So if you open
comply
a
with
smokehouse and there's people smoking, now how does that affect the employees? I mean, what's the,
that. Yeah, I mean, that's why you can't have it except in these private clubs we were talking about. It's against the law. It's going to remain against the law in these things.
So if you open a
can't
private club, then employees have to be notified that they're gonna be working in a smoke environment, I would think.
I think especially for private clubs, they're somehow don't.
They have the right to.
They're not
Well,
regulated.
private
under the
club's
law.
a private club.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Basically, we're saying you still have to comply with that.
Right.
Anybody else with questions or comments?
I have a statement, but we can wait till we kick off public speak to make that statement.
Okay. Do we have the list out there somewhere of speakers?
Maybe I cut and pasted wrong. No. But actually, finding typos and stuff would be really helpful. So, if you do find things, OCD about that. So. Yeah, that's great. You're the guy, man. We'll let you do that.
All right. Well, we'll see how this works.
So,
So you have a list if you don't, yeah,
Maybe
you have a
just look
list?
at that
So
list.
do we want Owen to read his statement before we go to public?
Did you want to wait, or do you want to?
No, I'm saying if we're at public speak time,
before.
if you don't mind me starting with.
Yeah,
with
I
what
think
have to
that's
say. Okay.
So, folks, if we could listen up, we're gonna start the public speak time, but Councilor Zaret's gonna start off with his own statement. So we can just put some attention up here.
So thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. This is a very important topic for our community. And I know it's kicked off a lot of concerns, and a lot of those concerns have been shared with me and my municipal colleagues. And I wanted to have the opportunity to address some of them. And I'll just clarify and preface this as saying that this is a response to the conversations I've had. It's not a criticism of anyone I've spoken to or a critique of anything they've said. It might be responses to some specific statements in general. And also it's a comment on how myself as a legislator, what my thought process is around this topic, and as well as how I choose to legislate. So if you'll bear with me, hopefully you took your Provigil today. Everyone, I'll preface this statement by reinforcing the notion that adolescent and youth use of cannabis, alcohol, and tobacco is detrimental to developing minds and bodies. I think we can all agree on that. As parents and community leaders, our goal is to educate our youth and community to prevent exposure to these substances by making them accessible to individuals over a specific age, in this case 21. These safeguards are in place to prevent access. The biggest challenge as legislators is to step out of our personal experience and into the realm of objectivity. I personally, and the subcommittee as a whole, have received input on this ordinance from a variety of sources, both for and against. While sentiment and feelings are important, we cannot effectively govern in the absence of objective data and peer-reviewed research. We do ourselves and the community a disservice when we legislate based on self-perception, bias, discrimination, and stigma. Unfortunately, a lot of the arguments I've received have been rife with the same bias and discrimination we've seen in our schools. Granted, is not directly racial bias, although I would argue that cannabis prohibition is tightly wrapped in a lengthy campaign of institutional racism, as Councilor Derby has pointed out. That said, I've heard nothing in arguments to me against this legal industry that does not in some way discriminate against the proprietors or the clients of these legal businesses. When you say, well, why don't we just tuck them away in the mills? That statement right there is inherently discriminatory. It reinforces the notion that these are businesses we need to hide. We need to focus more on education and prevention and less on sanctimony. You don't like these businesses? Don't endorse them. I will tell you that I've heard from a few people that they would consider suing the municipality for discriminatory zoning policy in regards to how we allow these businesses to operate versus our thriving alcohol establishments. When evaluating new zoning ordinances, we cannot work in a municipal vacuum, but we must look at the overall tone and tenor of the city. The existing ordinance and the existing businesses in a given zoning district. It is our job to see how a legal industry for individuals over 21 and over can fit into the current landscape of the city. We cannot use 2020 hindsight as to how we may have zoned other businesses in this process. So as we proceed, we must look at the landscape and allow fair, non-discriminatory business development in parallel to what currently exists. When there already exist businesses in the city and downtown business that are for patrons 21 and over and have advertising that's significantly suggestive or of its products, those being tobacco and alcohol, one cannot create a viable argument why an industry that is also for people 21 and over, with significantly more stringent advertising signage, etc., cannot be in the same space. Simply because it doesn't make you feel good is not an argument to discriminate and exclude these businesses from downtown business. I will note here that we can be sued for discriminatory zoning practices, as I've already noted. Additionally, making insinuations on the clientele that will patronize these establishments and the management of these establishments is, again, by definition, discriminatory, biased, and stigma-based. I know I'm repeating myself, but that's to make a point. Making vague derogatory references to the clients who support legal business, creating fantastical stories of children being lured into cannabis retail spaces by bloodshot-eyed boogeymen falls into the realm of razor blades in your children's Halloween candy. Postulations of smoke billowing out of businesses and cannabis odor is not within the acceptable guidelines of rules and regulations. And I will state, were that to happen, I will be the first one there to make sure that license is suspended. Academic input is valuable if it is presented as academic in nature. Peer-reviewed research, investigative journalism, facts, science, not sentiment. When we zone around feeling anxiety, we discriminate and are ineffective. To say we don't want a legally operating business located in our city because we don't like how it makes us feel, and to furthermore project that into a postulation of how it will somehow affect our children, that right there is failure to objectively legislate. I'll bring you back to the vote, where 65% of our city voted for cannabis to be legal. And I will reference the movie Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan. When Spock, dying in the warp chamber, trying to fix the ship, the Starship Enterprise, so it did not blow up, he says to his best friend, James Tiberius Kirk, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one." And while we need to think about the entire community, we also need to do our due diligence and accept our mandate as legislators to work to produce time, place, and manner for the majority of voters who requested these businesses in town. Now, we also need to be sensitive with our legislation. We need to, as I've said prior, be fact-driven. And we also do need to be sensitive to the whole of the voters and to think about that 35% who didn't want these businesses in town. That being said, I've not received any compelling objective data to date demonstrating the detrimental effects of legal cannabis on our youth. Additionally, concerns over misuse, diversion, and abuse of cannabis edibles is not apparent in the literature based on 29 states that have legalized medical marijuana in 1996. And more recently, recreational legalization with 9 states currently, beginning with Colorado in 2012. In fact, the data shows flat to declining rates of adolescent use, and I'll also note opioid use in states that have legalized either medical or recreational programs. Additionally, concern that access to edibles does not show any significant issue. I also cannot find any data suggesting that buffers of any size make any significant difference. And I will note to you that I have undergone exhaustive research looking into the efficacy of buffer zones or the point of buffer zones or the origin of buffer zones. And the only thing I could find was a purpose for circumferential buffer zones around areas where industrial hazards or industrial exposure would be an issue. So in the case of zoning around farming areas and the exposure to pesticides, or zoning around things like where there's operation of loud machinery and exposure to noise. Now, maybe you don't believe me, but I will share some peer-reviewed articles briefly with you to support these facts. This is actually a bunch of research I found from that was cited in an article called "What About the Children?" This is from the March 2017 State of Washington Office of Financial Management, and this is titled "Monitoring Impacts of Recreational Marijuana Legalization." And to summarize, they found that legalization did not increase youth use. In fact, there was a decline in certain age groups. Otherwise, it was flat. Additionally, and this is important as we discuss about our children walking by some of these businesses, legalization did not, via normalization, convince teens that using cannabis was acceptable. And additionally, and this is the most important part as we talk about these businesses in our town, legalization did not increase teen access to cannabis. The Lancet Journal of Psychiatry concluded in a 2015 study that I'm out of place. I'm sorry, Journal of American Medical Association, Journal of Pediatrics in 2017, so this is recent, concluded that there was no change to rates of use following legalization. The additional note I'll make in looking at all the facts and figures of all of these research articles is that any use among children is typically 6th grade and over. When we're talking about buffer zones, we're talking about our 3 elementary schools where the highest grade is 4th grade. And essentially the youth use nationwide amongst 4th graders is essentially 0. And I certainly don't see that going up. It's for this reason that I cannot conclude that there is any direct correlation between school buffers and access, increased use, etc. The argument that a 500-foot buffer somehow protects our children is at surface value arbitrary. Proponents say keeping these businesses from our children protects them from undue influence. By that same logic, one could argue that students who attend Maple Street School, where there are 2 bars and a package store within sight of vision, have higher rates of alcoholism and tobacco use due to proximity to alcohol establishments and stores selling cigarettes. Where this falls apart is, what do we say when school isn't in session? What about children who live around the corner from one of these businesses? What do you propose we do on weekends when they walk downtown with their families? Do we draw a 500-foot buffer around our children at all times? The more you dissect it, the more specious the reasoning becomes, and the more arbitrary and capricious the policy becomes. The planning board proposes 200 feet. We have concerned residents who are requesting 500 feet. I feel that in the true spirit of compromise and in community thinking and encouraging business development, which we have to remember, we need to, these businesses are going to bring valuable taxes into our coffers. We agree on 350 feet by path of travel, as the spirit of concern is travel to and from schools. Legislation is often needed to enact social change. Obviously, people are uncomfortable with this legislation. That's why 1/3 of the city voted against it. But we cannot simply use people's discomfort as reasoning to shape our zoning policies. Think about same-sex marriage and even racial equality. There were lots of people who said, I'm uncomfortable with this and I don't want them around my children. We need to move forward. I want to note briefly, I am happy to provide citations, but there is also, I'll just tell you briefly, there's also excellent data showing decrease in opioid deaths, as well as decrease of rates of alcoholism that have legalized cannabis. I just want to address, I appreciate your time, I just want to really quickly also address the issue around edibles, which was brought up. I searched exhaustively, and I could find no viable research to demonstrate significant diversion or access by minors of edibles with all the states that have had these available, some going back to close to 20 years. What I did do research on, this is important, because everyone asks, what if these things get into the hands of our children? So I did research on accidental ingestion of substances of this type. The concern, of course, inevitably is that communities that zone for recreational retail is that we will suddenly have our children consuming edibles at an inordinate rate. Our state will have vigorous packaging and labeling requirements, but how does that play out elsewhere? Well, I'll tell you first of note for background, I researched the LD50 of cannabis. LD50 is the lethal minimal dose for any given substance. And I will note, first of all, there are no documented cases of lethal use of cannabis. The LD50 in a normal adult of cannabis is 1,500 pounds. And that needs to be consumed in over 15 minutes. So if you could do that, God bless you. In
That's why this best doesn't fit.
In comparison, you would have to take 20 extra strength Tylenol to suffer severe hepatotoxicity and potential death. Getting back to ER visits for accidental ingestion, cannabis sits at the bottom of a nationwide list. Less common, actually twice less common than caterpillar stings. Significantly less common than exposure to contact lens fluid, pen ink. Nationwide, there are 254 visits. This is a couple of years ago, but there's 254 visits for cannabis ingestion versus 1,000 for kids ingesting energy drinks. Drilling down to Colorado, 14 children went to the ER for accidental ingestion over a period of 3 years. And mind you, again, there were no episodes of actual toxicity from these exposures. I'll also leave you with the statistics that kids are 136 more times to be poisoned by diaper cream than by cannabis. So there's no good evidence for banning edibles. Do I think that we should stringently package these, lock them away, and protect our kids from getting them? Absolutely. But I can't find a use to discriminate against its sale at legal businesses. And I'll leave you with a couple more things. How do we prevent access? Well, those of us who are parents, we parent. We make sure our children are educated to understand the harm of use. We take appropriate measures to make sure things like alcohol and cannabis is secured in our homes. And I can assure you that the regulations surrounding cannabis retail are vigorous on the state level. Rules are in place to ensure that businesses are doing their jobs. We need to do our jobs as parents as well. But of course, we also need to establish vigorous youth education programs. And I want to show you guys one more thing. Thank you so much for your time. I just want to share a couple pictures of you that I took around town. So the first thing I'm going to do is just really quickly, I don't know if you guys can all see this, but sorry. Just a show of hands. This is just a building in town. Does this make anyone uncomfortable, this building?
Does he need to lean it forward?
Yeah, can you go down the
Does looking at this building make you uncomfortable?
Yeah, we can't see it.
All right.
Can you put on the projector?
I don't know if I can.
No, you need to have like the old.
What's the address of that building?
Well, I'll get there. The point is that I went around town and took a lot of pictures. That picture in general is the Passacomet Club, which is situated right next to Center Pepin School. It's a completely innocuous looking, unlabeled building that allows alcohol consumption, private smoking, and gambling. And children go to school right next to there. And I don't think any child that's gone to Center Pepin School has ever experienced harm from that building. I also took a picture, which you probably won't be able to see. That's the mouse the mouse toy that got stuck in my Roomba. That's not the one I wanted to show you. And you probably won't be able to see this either. But here's a picture. That's Maple Street School. Those are pictures, those are advertisements right there for smoking and vape pens. This is acceptable, and an unmarked a business that has innocuous markings that's available for people 21 and over isn't. I'll also note that if you walk right around the corner from those same signs, we have copious signs for gambling and for purchasing more cigarettes. So we just have to think about, again, tone and tenor. What's already available in our town? What's the zoning that's available? And what's fair and not capricious? So thank you so much for your time. I know that was long-winded, but I appreciate it.
Well said. Well said.
Thanks, Owen. All right, so we do have quite a few people on this list, so I'm going to ask people to try to sort of keep it brief, but I do want you to feel like you have time to say what you need to say. I'm going to call you up in order here, and I'll apologize in advance for butchering everyone's last names. First one is easy, Robert Hill.
Thank you. Yeah.
If you come up to the podium and and if you could just state your name and address for the record so we get everything in the minutes, that'd be great.
My name is Robert Hill. I'm 37 Park Street in Easthampton, and I'm the headmaster at Williston Northampton School. First, thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I also applaud the spirit of compromise, which I think is an important one. And my main reason for speaking tonight is on behalf of all children, specifically the 500 children that we oversee at Williston, aging 14 to 18, who come from 25 states and 25 countries, but also all the children in the community. I take note of the comments that you made, Mr. Zaret. You sound like a very schooled debater, in fact, and there's some comments that I would make to that just to keep everybody thinking a little bit. In debate, there are a couple of tactics one uses in debate. One, you set up a straw man, because if you set up a straw man and disprove that, you're denigrating the argument of your opponent. The other, which is challenging, is called the negative fallacy. You can Google it. The negative fallacy is, I don't see smoke in this building, therefore there's no fire. And so to say that we don't see data, or there is no data, suggesting, say, that edibles would increase the use of use of marijuana products or cannabis products is a logical fallacy. We do not have the data out there because the data hasn't existed quite yet. I will state the obvious, which is that much of the data, and anyone is free to Google this, that comes from Colorado or comes from places that have legalized marijuana, the best that you can say and the best that you can find is that it's in the air. It's 50-50. Some say the evidence shows that use has gone up. Some say the evidence shows that use has gone down. So I caution everyone to fall victim to straw men in reasoning and the negative fallacy. There are 108 communities, and I'm getting this information from Channel 5's website. There are 108 communities in the Commonwealth who are pausing and going slower. They're using either moratoriums or outright bans, or they're legislating boundaries. Sure, it is a compromise to say 350 feet is a compromise when you stake out 200 feet, but that the Commonwealth says 500 feet. It would be a compromise to say that the initial legislation suggests 50 feet and the Commonwealth says 1,000 feet, and we'll compromise at 150. So again, we have to be rational about these arguments and be thoughtful about these arguments. But again, I'm here to speak on behalf of the youth in the town, the youth at my school, the youth at all the schools in the town. I take exception with the notion that because fourth graders don't use marijuana, therefore they will never use marijuana. Mr. Friedman, in his book, The World is Flat, talked about disruption. And with disruption, he said, if you can do something faster, cheaper, and better, you will disrupt whatever the industry was that was before. Vaping is faster, better, and cheaper. A vape pod of nicotine costs $10 and is the equivalent of 4 packs of cigarettes. $40. Faster, better, cheaper. So I urge the council, in the spirit of their compromise, to consider these proposals that you're going to be hearing tonight. Having 4 stores open for the first year is great. I don't happen to believe that enough data will be analyzed within 1 year to push forward with 4 more. And I think it's very important for the city, on behalf of the children of the city, to think very carefully and cautiously about this legislation that is going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Chuck McCullough, please.
I'm Chuck McCullough, and I'm 42 Ashley Circle, and I'm also the Chief Financial Officer at Williston, Northampton. Obviously, after following Mr. Hill, I do want to share, I've spoken to both the Planning Board as well as the Ordinance Committee. And I will also say I appreciate the spirit of compromise in some of the ordinance changes or suggestions that were made in the presentation earlier this evening. A few questions I would have, and I think I would want to have some clarification if you wouldn't mind. First, I do think the overarching concern that we've expressed all along has been, let's take this slowly. There's no reason to rush into things and to have some moderation in what we're doing. I think in the spirit of compromise, we've already seen some of that from the Ordinance Committee's work. However, I would like to suggest that a cautious approach would likely be, again, exercise, in the step of compromise, understand we can debate buffer zones all day long on the benefits. Actually given a guidance that 500 feet is something to think about. And I would suggest that in the interest of cautiousness, that we, for at least the time being, utilize that as the base plan for Easthampton. It would just seem to me to be a reasonable first step. Certainly could be revisited and have more debate about whether buffer zones are going to be effective or not, but I think at the first step, it would be a wise decision. Second thing, and this is where I think I need a little bit of clarity, I did see that it was in 2018 that we were going to say 4 retail establishments, but also 4 social consumption establishments. So unless I'm reading that wrong, that would be 8 establishments in 2018 of some sort. And if that's the case, again, I would say that that strikes me as being moving pretty quickly on something that we still don't have our arms around completely. And the other question I would have about is that 2018, meaning as of July 1, 2018, and as of 2019 starts in January. So are we really saying we're limiting it to these 4 retail locations and 4 social consumption locations for 6 months, and then we're going to go back and revisit 4 more retail locations and 4 more social consumption on January 1. To me, again, that is moving very, very quickly for something that is not yet proven in terms of impact and tone and tenor to the community. As much as many of the good things that have been expressed about some of the other aspects of the ordinances, which I think are fantastic, in terms of odor control, access, 21 controlling the entrance to these facilities, I still think that that strikes me as being very, very quick. I'll leave it there. The only other thing I would ask the group to look at is I've come across an article, and I've shared it with some people, and it's on the business side of things, and I found it pretty interesting, and I urge you to go and look at it. And the site is 538.com. It's an article about Washington State, who's already had some track record on what's going on with the cannabis and the availability of cannabis, legal cannabis in Washington State. And what they're stating is that the business impact isn't what you think. Initially, there's a great push, but then, like any business, big business comes in and really starts driving prices down. And they've seen some real damaging impact by that dynamic, where businesses that really for all good reasons establish themselves in a community then really get beaten up by the market really doing what we'd expect it to do. And a lot of these smaller businesses that you'd love to see thrive in a community regardless of what they're doing really do get beaten up. So I urge some cautiousness in that area as well. It may not be everything we think it is from a business side. All right?
Can I ask
Thank
a
you.
response question
Please.
to that? Are you suggesting some sort of big box concept be added to the ordinance?
Not at all. I'm just saying that the dynamics that you see in reading that article, I think every town, like Easthampton would be no different than any. You'd love to see local businesses and small businesses and shops establish themselves. What I'm saying is that in reading the article, from what I can glean from it, that there are businesses that come in that have support of larger backing that drive prices down and drive a lot of other people out of business. And so we have to think about that a little bit too as we extend licenses. All right, thank you.
Duncan Laird.
Sounds like Walmart.
104 Petticoat Hill Road. I'd like to also introduce Kyle Pruitt, who's the Director of Counseling Services at the Wellesley Northampton School. And Dr. Pruitt is our consulting psychiatrist who did his PhD thesis on the effects of cannabis on adolescent neurobiology. You were serious about that, right?
No, I was not.
But it's worked for a very long time.
Thanks anyway, appreciate that.
But it's worked for a very long time with teenagers who are using substances. Despite Mr. Zaret's, I think, cherry picking of the research, marijuana use in Hampshire counties, cannabis use in Hampshire County is increasing. Since the local prevention coalitions released their survey. The local coalition preventions released their surveys on adolescent substance abuse in 2017. And they surveyed alcohol use, cigarette use, and cannabis use. And alcohol use is declining, cigarette use is declining, but cannabis use is increasing. It's increased from 25% to 31%.
This is teenage use?
This is adolescent use, yes. Actually, 10th through 12th grade. And cigarette use has gone down, and most people see a correlation between prevention efforts and the reduction of tobacco use. The negative, in the same survey, teenagers talked about 49% who used marijuana said they felt groggy, tired, and unmotivated. And 39% had coughing or breathing problems. 33% had difficulty remembering things. 28% procrastinating or not getting things done. 25% spending more money than I wanted to. 11% problems with family. 11% doing poorly on tests or schoolwork. And 6% problems at school or work. We see almost, in mental health, we see almost a direct correlation with anxiety among teens increasing around the same percentage. And there's no doubt that, the cultural needle has shifted, and the messages we send to youth about marijuana use, cannabis use, have had a big impact on that. Not here to debate legalization, but Mr. Zaret, I also want to commend the committee and the ordinance, or the planning board and the ordinance committee, for taking a more moderate approach and being cautious. This is such new territory for all of us. But I just want to challenge the committee and the board that prevention happens at all levels. And I think a few of you noted parents and family, and absolutely they have to be at the core, at the center of prevention. But your deliberations, your comments, and I think what gives me some concern tonight is reading Mr. Zaret's transcript. Our youth out there are going to take the message that there are no adverse effects. And as somebody who's worked for 30 years with adolescents at risk, I have to tell you, there's a lot at risk. And we have, I would guess, 1,000 plus students within 350 feet of here. And so it is so important what message we give youths. And the clarity of that message. So that's the main thing I wanted to say tonight. And I certainly can talk more individually if you're interested in some of the specifics I'll ask Dr. Pruitt to make a few comments.
Thank you, Duncan. I do not live in Easthampton. I live in Northampton. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I've been in practice for 40 years. And I've also been an academic child psychiatrist teaching at the Child Study Center at Yale. I have watched enormous changes in the adolescent domain over those 4 or 5 decades. And one of the things that has not changed in those decades is the way the adolescent brain develops. That has remained constant. And the adolescent brain is a very interesting organ. It is not a completed organ. It is growing very rapidly, highly susceptible to the experiences that they encounter every day. Risk is extremely attractive to adolescents because they're so anxious to avoid a life that would sit you in a room like this for long hours at a time, and hoping that they will be not only productive, but they will be creative and thoughtful and simply different. The judgment that they need occurs in the frontal lobes. The information that they are acquiring sits in the middle part of the brain. The connection between these two will not happen until they are 25. That is a long time. And it's a long time in which they can not only absorb a lot of positive experience, but a lot of negative experience. The toxicity that comes from cannabis use is very difficult to predict. I have had children in my practice and adolescents who are fairly heavy cannabis users and who are able to tolerate it. I've also had very light cannabis users wind up with a psychosis that they will live with for the rest of their life. I cannot tell the difference between who is who, and neither can anyone else. And that's why I really urge you to put a speed bump on the journey that you're on until we really have a better grip on how your community is going to respond to this. I'm sympathetic for what you're trying to do as protecting your businesses. I also know many of you are parents. You're very anxious to protect your children. I will point out, however, most children do not learn how to use buds in their homes. They learn it from their friends and from their peers. And so we can do everything we can, and many of the families that work with me did everything they could, and they still wound up with a child who is depressed, anxious, dropping out of school, and unable to work. I'm not saying it's uniformly toxic, and I do have to take issue with your putting it in the same category as opioids. There is nothing. You would never look for toxic effects if you understood the pharmacology of cannabis and THC. So that's a bit of a straw man, I would agree. The other thing that I would point out is that you've often made analogy to alcohol, and the two have profoundly different effects on the brain. We have a legal limit that we can read about when a person is compromised from alcohol. We do not have a limit for THC. And the capacity of a person to look at a teenager and say you're stoned or you're not is highly variable, and your training will help you, but it will not protect the children who consume and leave places and put themselves in danger. I'm not here as a Puritan, fork waver. I'm here as a person to encourage you to listen to the experiences you've had and to think carefully about that teenage brain and what you're really trying. You have to balance what you're doing for your business promise with what you may wind up inadvertently exposing some children to a very easy form of consumption that they would not have had before. So I urge you caution. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure, Sal.
So before you gentlemen leave, I just have a couple comments and questions, I guess. Sure. So if you could stay. So it's interesting. I have the spiffy data in front of me, and it looks like the 2017 past 30-day substance use for marijuana combined for 10th and 12th grade. Is that what you gave, 10th and 12th grade?
Yes.
Okay. So it's exactly the same as it was in 2009, which was the year after decriminalization. And in 2011 it dropped. 2013 it dropped. 2013 was the year after medical marijuana was voted in. And then 2015 was pretty much even with 2013. 2017, a bit of a uptick to 31%. And so, I think that it's interesting to look at this data. One of the things that was also in this data was that the perception of harm between alcohol and cannabis had shifted a little bit. Did you notice that? And when I say perception of harm, that the 10th and 12th graders felt that alcohol was more harmful. And so, I think that it's important. I'm just wondering, as we look at potential for harm, I think it's important to, as we look at these two together, maybe they are apples and oranges, but they are both psychoactive substances that are commonly used. And in fact, I would venture to say that there's probably some adolescents that are using cannabis today, have used it a decade ago, have used it 10 decades ago. And I would say that as far as straw men go, I think it's really interesting how the gentleman brought up the psychoactive component causing psychosis. And it's very interesting. If you actually dig into the research, what you'll find is that the people that experience psychosis after using cannabis are people that were predisposed to psychosis like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder already, family history. So they were going to present that anyway. So true, the cannabis use did trigger an early onset of something that was basically what the research says was going to happen anyway. So understanding of family history, and so you shake your head, but I would challenge you, and this is something I looked up, schizophrenic rates in states that have legal cannabis? Have they spiked? In fact,
How many hours do we have?
well, I can tell you they haven't. They've remained flat.
I'll address those 3 points. First of all, marijuana use is at the highest it's ever been in this country as of 2017. And so we are at a very high peak and have been for some time. And so dips in rate are too close for us to tell what's statistically and historically significant and what's not. But the tide is as high as it's ever been in cannabis use among adolescents, particularly in this country. That's a historical fact. That can't be argued. Secondly, it's not schizophrenia. I'm sorry, I don't mean to go after your, but it's not schizophrenia
Well,
that
the
is
study,
caused.
in New Zealand was focused on schizophrenia.
Well,
There's also
good.
one in England that focused
I'm
on
glad
bipolar
it
and
did, but what
schizophrenia.
I'm worried about are the patients that sit in front of me who are no longer actually capable of holding a job, and they have a psychosis, and it's not schizophrenia. It's a substance-induced psychosis, which is very different. And I couldn't tell, and I took careful family histories, who was going to wind up with that and who was not. And so that is an enormous risk that you're going to be taking, and we try to educate people that that's an issue. Alcohol is more toxic to the brain than THC. But THC's toxicity has to do with mood, thinking, memory, and depression. All areas that have a lot to do with whether you're going to get out of high school and get a job.
Well, I think you might have misspoke. I don't think that it's not toxicity, but the areas of the brain that it affects, the endocannabinoids that we produce naturally, basically that affects memory, mood. You're correct there, but it's not toxic to the brain. I think that's.
Well,
Can I jump in for a second? I have a quick question. So I just want to make sure we know why we're here. So everyone agrees that cannabis use is bad for kids as they develop. That's why in our regulations we say no one under 21 is allowed anywhere near a marijuana establishment or consumption place. So to continue to talk about adolescence, we all agree in this room. So can we try to move past the think of the kids thing, because we have thought of the kids. And so what we are asking people to come up and ask us and challenge us on is the specifics of the regulations. So if you want to say think of the kids because maybe we should change the buffer, that's what we can talk about. Or if you want to say think of the kids because maybe I don't know, something else that we can actually put into a regulation. But we all understand, or maybe let's say no one under 22, because maybe you're 25 because the brain. We can discuss that and actually get to a point. But I think to say that I have the facts and you don't have the facts and I have the facts and you don't have the facts, we can all make facts sound exactly what we want them to say. We've seen that in every single political venue possible. So I would challenge everyone to tonight, or ask or request, whatever the word is, can we have discussions that we as a board can then take and make an action to change or modify or strengthen the regulations, because marijuana's here. We voted, it's going to be here. It's not a matter of when, it is a matter of when. Maybe we will talk about slowing down. That's a good suggestion. But it's here. So how do we make it so that we can make it best for everyone in the community? I'm sorry, that was a rant.
No, thank you.
No, I agree, and I think we can all agree it's harmful to youth. And I
Yes.
think if the
There's
takeaway
no
message
question.
from my statement was that I believe that youth should be exposed to these substances, the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah, we
And
all
I'll
agree.
be the first person there on the front lines if I find anyone in this community that's allowing access to our youth for marijuana, for cannabis. I'll be talking to our chief of police, Mr. Alberti, and making sure that that person suffers the appropriate consequences.
And I would say, if someone at Williston told you, hey, I got this vape pen from the place down the street and he's 19, you better be telling the police that, and the police should better be closing that place down that day.
Point well taken. I commend you for slowing down and taking a moderate approach. That was
Thank you.
the message.
That's a good- that's
I certainly
I can take
never,
that
I didn't
into
hear anything
consideration.
tonight which led me to believe that you're not concerned about kids.
Thanks.
Thank you
Appreciate
both.
And just one more comment before.
Yep.
I just want to say that anytime you take a substance out of the black market and bring it into a regulated, well-defined business, you are going to limit access. And I think that's important to recognize. If you just, if we don't enact these regulations and we just have people being able to go to other places to buy it, which they can buy it right now, they can grow it in their house right now, it's harder to grow it than it is to buy it. So people will probably grow less and buy more and hopefully have a place to consume, which will then divert it away from youth. But if you have it in your house because you have nowhere to get it, that's going to be more accessible to children. If you don't have a place to go to use it and you're forced to the park or you're forced to the bike path, that's going to impact children. This is something that needs to be acknowledged, that when you take something out of the black market and you require someone to have the ID to get in the door, that's going to limit youth access. Just like it does with alcohol. It's harder, this survey says it's harder to get alcohol than it is to get marijuana. I'll give you 3 guesses why. Because one you need an ID for. So, that's all I have to say.
All right, Stephen Lindsay?
Linsky.
Sorry.
Close enough.
The first of many mistakes. I apologize.
I'll probably make my share too. I'm Steve Linsky, 5 River Valley Way, and as you know, I volunteer with the Easthampton Healthy Youth Coalition, particularly as it relates to policy. My background, prior background, can you hear?
Speak a little closer to the microphone.
Yeah, real close.
There it is, okay. I did have a prior policy history relative to tobacco. And boy, everyone's been so articulate, I almost feel like I shouldn't come up here. Starting with you, Owen, I was following until you made that Star Trek reference, then I kind of lost it in there, but that's okay. Oh yes, the power of being with us. I think I appreciate the comment made by the commissioner about what we should be doing tonight. And I will tell you at the very beginning, I haven't had a lot of opportunity to compare the 2 drafts, so I'm kind of sitting there trying to go through them. So I'll just try to make a few points, and there may be more, because I just got the ordinance subcommittee's draft earlier today. I think generally, as you know, what the coalition does is just try to track data, get information that might lead to best practices, and act collaboratively with everyone in the community to do that. And that's the goal going forward. So I know there's a lot of reference in the whereases here to data collection, et cetera. So I'm hoping that process will continue. And I think the point we've been making, at least I've been making, I don't mean to repeat myself, is that we need a certain pace in order to best understand what is happening in our own community, never mind what's happening in various parts of the country as programs are being rolled out. So yeah, sure, we keep an eye toward Colorado, Washington State, any place that, and it's growing, so there's going to be more data very quickly. So I guess the point is to try to get a pace that works for everyone so the community can move together. It was pointed out in the very beginning, this is not about the 64 versus 36%. We're not relitigating last year's election. Frankly, this is a discussion among the 64% of us as to what we voted for. It's clearly going to be legalization, but that doesn't mean that it's any program and everyone's on board with it. So we're trying to get to that program that the majority can kind of go with. So let me just take a second to go through some of the text, and you can help me a little bit here. I noticed that there was a change in 10.10.1 in the reference to the purpose, and I think that was pointed out earlier. So the last line reads, protecting the public interest. That's in the ordinance subcommittee thing. The original text from the planning board referenced ensuring public health, safety, and well. I don't know whether is public interest just meant to be just another way to articulate that, because you made a point of changing the language, and that's why I was at first blush trying to understand that. Yes. Small typo in 10.10.3, but that's very minor. Getting to 10.10.4, subsection C, and this gets us to the number of sites, but I think that, at least I'm not clear, so maybe you can help, because we were just, the last speaker's just going through it, is how the numbers add up on this thing. It would appear that you can have 4 retail sales stores, and then 4 social consumption, and then 2 retailers the next year, and then 4 social consumption the year after. So if I understand, as we go into 2019, quick addition shows us that's a totality of 14, is that right? 4 for
14
year
in
1,
total.
that's 8.
4, 4, 4.
Another 2, and another 4, another 6. So we'd be up to 14. Now that's exclusive of, and this you can help me again, because it's mixed-use businesses are referenced separately and excluded from that calculation. So that's, well,
Not excluded?
okay, well,
No,
okay.
they're excluded from the.
Not including social consumption, co-op, or mixed-use businesses. And then there's a specific reference to the social consumption licenses, but there's no reference to mixed use. So how does it work with mixed use then?
Oh, I think
Mixed use would fall under
it would,
retail.
would I?
Because it's
No,
not,
it's not micro-business. You're
it's
talking
not,
about-
it's not defined. I
You're
didn't see a
talking-
definition for mixed use.
So it should be.
Were you intending that that includes both primary and
Primary and secondary.
primary and mixed use?
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably just a wording issue.
It's a good
That's a very good point,
That's
though.
a good point.
But so
That's a good
then
point.
also, I guess, I mean, if you have a mixed-use retailer and on-site consumption, does that count as 1 or 2, or
No.
which one,
So
or?
on-site consumption is, if you look at the current guideline draft, it's divided into, basically you have 3 forms of retail licenses now. You have brick and mortar, essentially like the equivalent of what we're seeing as a dispensary, but a recreational retail dispensary. And that's what we're talking about, or that's what Councilor Derby's talking about with just retail sale storefront. Then there is social consumption, and social consumption is divided into 2 subcategories.
Primary and secondary.
Correct, primary and mixed use, right? And so that's, did you mean, and so that.
What are those 2 categories?
Right, so those categories are, 1, primary would mean essentially like a cafe. What most people traditionally look at as a social consumption facility, where you go in, you purchase cannabis products for that use on site, not to be taken out, and that's the majority profit making ability of that business. I think it might be over 50% actually, and anyone else can correct me wrong. So then there's mixed use, where the proposed regulations would be, say, something like a yoga studio or a movie theater or something like that, where you can kind of like we had Popcorn Noir in town, which sold alcohol. So you can go and watch a movie. You pay to watch a movie, but then you can also consume cannabis products on site there. But that 50% of their profits are derived from non-cannabis business. So I guess the biggest question is, Councilor Derby, when you're saying social consumption, you just mean that umbrella for both of them?
Umbrella for both of them.
Okay. And
Yeah,
I
so-
think that's what Steve's asking, basically, right?
Yeah. So, and you know, there was, craft co-op was supposed to be removed from that piece, but social consumption and mixed-use business are like Councilors there, et cetera, fall under the same umbrella.
Oh, okay, so even with a narrow reading which folds in mixed use into the social consumption, it still is a minimum of 14
In the
after
first
1
2
year,
years.
and then no ceiling thereafter, because I think you said earlier, Councilor Derby, that the market would dictate at that point in time. So by comparison with the planning board's regulations, where we understood that there was it was up to 12 retail establishments, which seemed to take into the swath of everything that related in some form or fashion to retail sales, right? It could be a range, but it was going to be 12. Here, if I understand it, there really is no cap whatsoever. All there is a gradation up through 2018 and 2019. Just to understand it.
Yeah, that's currently
So,
how it's written.
I mean, I guess I would say that makes it very challenging, I think, getting back to what the coalition can do to kind of track, because, we're doing surveys and stuff. It'd be very challenging to track the impact
Yeah.
on the community at that pace. Just
I
saying,
think-
that, I
Stephen,
think
so
that's just a reality.
Just as a point of reference,
Yeah.
we have 49 liquor licenses in Easthampton. So, I think that's, so, and I think that can you equate is a dispensary like we have at INSA the same as a yoga studio that on Saturdays has an infused yoga class? Are they the same? And I think that's an important thing to recognize, that maybe there's going to be for social consumption, but one could be a yoga studio that has a couple days a week has an infused class. Maybe it's a cafe, and those are going to present very differently than a large-scale retail store. So I think that's
There are going to be
important to take-
distinctions throughout. So, I mean, I'm saying to sort through what we have as a program community-wide, it's just going to be challenging to figure it out without making assumptions. I mean, I think that what we have to avoid here is just assuming this or assuming that. And there's always a tendency to want to assume things. And I think you were very right, Counselor, to say, let's go past assumptions into the language. But I think the only way it works is if we can do it step by step and figure out exactly what we're seeing in our own community, which is what I think the work of the coalition is about. Let me just point to one last piece and reference rather to the, and we talked a little bit about this. That brings us to, you made reference to 10.10.5C with the hours of operation. Yes, it was, you indicated that you want to put in no later than 1 a.m. But the 8 o'clock opening was that to accommodate the medical dispensary, or I'm just trying to understand, because if it's not in a downtown zone, it could open as early as 8. Now, I don't know what that's really going to
We did have the medical
encompass.
dispensary come before us and shift their hours, and a lot of that had to do with the needing to drive and get deliveries.
It's understandable.
In other businesses.
It's understandable certainly for them, for people who are using it for medicinal purposes. I was just trying to understand how it applies to
I don't see
general
a difference
retail
between
use.
Is there a difference that you would see between them? I certainly don't. You may need deliveries, you may need access. Where do you see a difference?
Well, we're talking about for sales though, right? Not just whether you're open to accept a delivery.
I mean,
Oh, I see.
I was just trying to understand the rationale. It's different, I think, than what you had had. But let me just finally
The
look
planning
at.
board's version didn't have them opening at 8.
for the-
It was
that
8
was
to
what I
8.
said. Okay,
8 to
like
8,
I said,
yeah.
I'm going between the two, and I didn't see that difference. And the final, because when we talked about this last time, you said you want to mirror the medical marijuana time. That's what, when the question arose about the 8 a.m., that's what I thought I heard you say. That's what, am I
That
wrong
was
about-
the, I
am I
think
wrong
that was
about
what was in the original planning board document. Medical marijuana is 6 to 11.
Okay, then I
Yeah,
misunderstood.
and part of the confusion is that the original medical marijuana was 8 to 8, and then during the time we worked on this draft, we actually modified the bylaw for the medical one, which changed the hours at the request of INSA. So
I see.
the original version had the original hours and was never modified.
Okay, that might have been the confusion. The last point is 10.10.6. Now, there was a discussion about, what would happen if there's a citywide vote, which would be allowed under the under the statute. And rather debate the point about whether there is or isn't, the present language says, to the extent consistent with commission regulations, commission being the CCC. I guess the question is, because I'm thinking about the people who are going to go through this process, which is a challenging process, come up with a license. And what happens, I guess, if the commission never indicates in their regulations saying that the statute speaks for itself? The question had been asked whether there was an interpretation of the statute. The answer, I think so far, not. People have different ideas. So I guess why would there not be reference so that people who might be potential license holders or license holders know that it would be subject not merely to whether it's not inconsistent with commission regulations that may or may not ever exist, but also to the law, the law in general, which could include interpretation of the present statute, or ultimately perhaps a vote, by Easthampton. It seems like there should be some reference to that, and I think you were raising that point, Jim, earlier about that it's only referencing commission regulations with the assumption that it's going to be found somehow in commission regulations. But those regulations may end up still being silent as to this point. So in all fairness to the people who would have licenses, they should understand that it's what it might be subject to. That would be just a suggestion in the language.
Can I make a quick comment? I think, Steve, you raised two excellent points. One is how can we kind of regulate the speed as to how quickly and in what time frame we offer these licenses. And I think it's beholden upon us to kind of look at these numbers again and figure out how we can drill down into those, stretch them out a little bit more, parse them out over a few more years perhaps. And that's also in the interest of developing sustainable business too. And then the other thing too, I think if I'm going to make an argument about equity, then I think it's also beholden upon us to look at if we're going to equate retail to package stores, then we have to look at the hours of package stores and determine if we're offering basically, if it's the same across the board.
And bars.
And
Social
bars.
consumption.
Yeah, bars with social consumption and package stores with retail spaces. And so I do think that that 8 a.m. Number, I think that's fair when you're talking about the medical side, but from the retail side, we may need to look at making that a little later.
Well, and also they are merging the two
Right,
under
so
the same umbrella.
that's the complicated thing. Yeah.
I mean, we could, like, I get that the medical marijuana establishment could open a recreational component, which would allow people in. Today you can't go in, but they could regulate different hours. So the medical side could be open at 8 a.m., the recreational side could be open at 10 a.m. I don't see that as a...
They're gonna have to be run as totally distinct businesses if they're doing them both. I mean, they can
Right.
convert completely recreational, but if they do both, an entity's gonna have to, I mean, everything is done like two separate businesses, so I don't know why you couldn't have different hours for whether you're there.
But I would also bring us back to a comment that was made at a previous public hearing about equity, because, you know, not everybody that needs a medical cannabis card can
Understood.
afford one.
Understood.
And so, you know, a lot of people are waiting for the recreational to come on so they don't have to spend that $300. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great,
Thanks,
thank you.
Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Good points.
William Hartley?
Hello.
Hi.
As I said last time, I'm
Can you just
not
state your address too for the record? so we
Yes,
get
my
it?
name is William Hartley. My address is 635 Graham Road, and that's in South Windsor, Connecticut.
Okay.
So I would like to introduce myself. I am William Hartley, and I am going to apply for a recreational store in Easthampton. And I'm not a big corporation. I'm just a little guy here. I just want to have a mom and pop's place. And I've worked in the insurance industry, kind of like Peg, for 30 years, and I've had enough of it. So I've saved, so I've saved my money, and this is my 401k money I'm putting into this. So I have a lot at risk. So just today, I put $3,000 in for a deposit on a place on Cottage Street, and I certainly hope it's beyond the 350-foot limit. I'll talk to you about that afterwards. But I'm committed to this. I'm committed to this town. I want to be part of it. I want to add to the community. I want to run a tight ship financially, follow all of the rules. I want to make sure that I keep a close tabs on inventory, finances, ensure that no one under 21 gets into the store, and I want to have a clean store. So my background is I have an MBA, my wife has an MBA, my older daughter went to Smith College, my younger daughter's going to college, so I am an advocate for education, and I certainly do not think that marijuana is healthy at all for young people especially. So I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm not, I consider myself a decent person. I do volunteer work. I've been identified as one of the top 3 volunteers at the Hartford, in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm on my church vestry, which is like the board of directors, and I've been on that for 6 years, and I'm rolling off because that's the maximum. I'm also what's called a LEM, and that is a lay Episcopal minister. And what that means is that I can apply the sacrament of I can't even think of what it is, but I'm a little nervous, as you can see. But I go out to people that are infirmed, and I give them the wine and the bread, and we go through the whole service, basically. So I don't think I'm a bad person. I've brought up my children to be decent people. My wife, she's never smoked marijuana. And, you know, it's been a little bit difficult to persuade her that this is what I want to do. And she's coming around to it. But I would just ask that the board seriously consider my application, because it's a big commitment on my part. And I've already actually put real dollars into this, and I did it today. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Goldstein?
Should be made for taller people. So my name is Marion Goldstein. I live at 16 John Street. I'm here both representing myself as an individual, as a parent in our community, as well as elected official for the school committee. And so first I'm going to start with reading a letter from the school committee to both the Easthampton City Council, Ordinance Subcommittee, as well as the Planning Board. As the City Council enacts the first recreational marijuana zoning ordinance for the City of Easthampton, we, the members of the Easthampton School Committee, respectfully request the approval of a 500-foot buffer zone around existing school buildings. This is the distance that is recommended by the state of Massachusetts, by our city planner and superintendent, and we feel that this buffer represents a reasonable and important protection for the young people of Easthampton. Additionally, we request that the City Council begin with a limit of 4 total available licenses for retail and social consumption establishments. We acknowledge that adults may safely manage their consumption of marijuana, but with the consumption of alcohol, there is a clear medical evidence of the risk of the harmful health consequences for young people. Evidence from the studies conducted by health authorities, including the American Academy of Pediatrics and American Medical Association, show that regular marijuana use among teenagers and young adults impairs brain development, diminishes learning, and reduces IQ, motivation, and memory. To our concern, there is a false perception among some teenagers that marijuana is without risk. Our hope is that intentionally zoning regulations can avoid reinforcing that the perception or increasing marijuana's allure among young people. Research regarding the effects of the proximity of the recreational marijuana facilities is at the very earliest stages of studies. But those states that have led the way in this new industry, including Colorado and Washington, have enacted a 1,000-foot buffer zone for school zones. It is our understanding that a 500-foot buffer zone would still permit business opportunities in our city's desirable retail areas. It is also our understanding that the City Council would have full capacity to both reduce buffer zones and increase available licenses in the future. We recommend that as a city, we enter the recreational marijuana market with reasonable caution and limits to provide an opportunity to assess its effects on city culture and health, and to provide time for educational institutions to develop programs and supports that are appropriate for children and teenagers within this new legal and social context. And it's signed by all the members of the school committee. I'd like to give those 3 copies to the sitting city councils, please. So that's what we determined and wanted to put forward from the school committee. The piece that I really want to emphasize is that, as other people have said before, jumping in with 8 licenses in July 1st and potentially, the way it was written, January 1st of 2019, another 8 licenses, or 6 licenses, that does not feel like a slow process into this. It feels very much diving into the deep end and hoping that we all get along and it all works out. And so I cannot emphasize strongly enough that I really request that we take this slow. This is not about saying no. We are here where we are. but we do need to take it slow and make sure that it fits well with our culture and with our community and brings everybody along in a safe way, and particularly our youth. Okay, so that's where we stand very clearly by the state guidelines that it says 500 feet. And I really put it on you to say why we should, what evidence shows us that we should have less than 500 feet. The state is recommending 500-foot buffer zone. Please enact a 500-foot buffer zone. Thank you very much.
Mayor, I just want to clarify one thing. So the number of licenses is not going to re-roll over on January 1. It's going to be the fiscal calendar year, July 1 to June 30th of 2019.
Okay.
So we're not talking in January we get to do more. It's that full year of 2018-19 is year
Okay.
one.
And
So
just
then
to-
correcting the language in there would be great.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
a follow-up,
thanks.
I think that the reason why it's 500 feet, we've discussed this at prior meetings, is because in most cities, schools aren't dispersed as they are in our community. And in many cities, you can still have a significant amount of downtown business with a 500-foot buffer around schools. With a 500-foot buffer in our community, it takes out
Downtown
almost
business.
all of downtown. It's like a little tiny sliver, like maybe one business or two business storefronts that are available, but they're already filled up. So that's why we decided 200 feet. I have a question for anyone discussing the 500 feet. I'm trying to wrap my mind around it just from a logistic point of view. What is that extra 150 feet going to do to a child? Are they not going to walk that extra 150 feet? Or, and anyway, we're not even really, like, if they're not going to buy anything walking that extra 150 feet, is it a sign they're going to see? Is it, what's the
Can I turn this back
concern?
on you, though? The people who are the residents, the people who are going to be going and buying these, that's what makes no difference. They're going to drive to the location, whether it's 150 feet, whether it's 5 feet, whether it's 500 feet. They're going to drive to where they want to buy the product that they're looking to buy, right? And so
But they won't be able to in our community because downtown will be completely
actually,
unable
I
to.
completely disagree. I'm sorry. By looking at the maps, you can see directly 500 feet is basically where Amy's is on Cottage Street from Maple Street. So from Amy's all the way down to the pond is beyond the 500-foot buffer zone. And from the Williston School Building, the closest place is roughly around, I'm forgetting the name of the restaurant, but the restaurant and then the Button Building. So both of those are beyond a 500-foot buffer zone. So there is a half of Cottage Street available. Union Street, I completely agree, for as long as that we are located with our school buildings where they are, with Center and Pepin, yes, I agree. A lot of Union Street would be not allowed, but Cottage Street has about approximately half of it available. And ideally, especially as a
Main
school committee
Street's
member, that we are hoping that with the vote in May, that we're going to have a new school building, and at that point, within 3 years, most of Union Street would open up. So,
Marin, I would put it back on you. We're starved for good locations in this community. It's very hard for those looking for a business to find the right space. That's taking out choice real estate in a place where typically we have most of our bars, where people that are doing cannabis are going to go anywhere. And there is no really good evidence, as Salem pointed out, that there's going to be any benefit from those buffers. But what will produce benefit, a tremendous benefit I think I'll get agreement from everyone here, is education. And the money from that education is coming from these facilities, from our agreement and from taxation. We're going to do so much more to educate and help our children by supporting social consumption, by supporting these businesses so that we can get the funding from the host agreements to make a real difference. I'm not saying there is no effect from normalization. I believe there is. I work in the addiction industry. But I think the education component vastly outweighs it.
then why have a 300-foot, 50-foot buffer?
Why
Why
have
not
a
just
buffer
zero
at all?
buffer?
There should be
That's
no
a
buffer.
very good question,
That's a good
actually.
question.
That's
It's
what we
common
actually asked.
That's what we asked originally, because I mean I've been trying every day since we had our last meeting to find research on the effectiveness of buffers. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Search Institute. They came up with 40 developmental assets, risk and protective factors. They create best practices for youth prevention. And I'm hoping that some of the people in the audience know what I'm talking about. But building resiliency is such a huge piece of, making sure that kids aren't vulnerable to influences outside of, you know, whatever those influences are, media, advertising, peers, all those things, right? So for us to focus on, I mean, this is where I was coming from. Why are we focusing on imaginary buffers for things that are, like, if we want to really protect our kids, we need to really think about protecting them from the alcohol advertising that is blatantly in their face when they're at center school. When you, I mean, it's in your face.
And cigarettes.
And these businesses would have literally none of that. So, you know, how are we protecting the kids by allowing these alcohol establishments to still have signage that is targeting them, but say, sorry, cannabis users, you don't get to have a place to go because we need a 500-foot buffer, which is going to completely take away most of Cottage Street and you know all of Union Street. For no, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. And if you could not find a stronger youth advocate in this community who wants to protect the kids and make sure that they are having all the resources they need. You know what? I want my kids and their school district not to tell them that marijuana users are bad, but to give them meaningful opportunities at school that build their resiliency, that have great relationships with the people in their school, not focusing on buffers that don't make any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just
Then why did the
ludicrous to me.
state guidelines of 500
Because
feet?
the
Why is
state guidelines
Colorado
came
and
from Rule
Washington
16D,
1,000
which is a
feet?
notification requirement.
Hold on. Let's have a
Sorry.
little more order.
Sorry.
So, Sam, do you want to address that one?
I think that, you know, the state, I said this earlier, I'll say it again. The state 500-foot buffer is directly taken from Rule 16D, which requires bars and alcohol establishments to notify schools and churches if they are going to be within a 500-foot buffer. And that notification process is not a nullification, they don't get to be there. It's we're going to talk to you, does our business impact the education of the children or the church services that are happening? And that was transposed, Rule 16D, you can look it up, to the 500-foot buffer, which is an exclusion zone. So a 500-foot buffer for this means nothing can go into that area. And it is pretty, and the reason why we left it in there and the reason why the planning board did was because at all of the meetings, it had been kind of deliberated that the downtown area could be an appropriate place for a tasteful, respectful place that doesn't have smoke, that is serving the people who voted for this to be accessible and legal, and does not disrupt the education of our children or harm them in a tangible way. And I don't know that 100. I mean, I'm feeling. I guess I'm a little bit verklempt right now because I feel like I came into this with the spirit of cooperation and finding compromise, and I don't know that I'm feeling that is being reciprocated. So pardon my tone, but I think that it's important for me to understand truly in order to legislate what that 150 feet does.
Yep, and that's what I was trying to get at. And I hesitate to make regulations assuming that the school is going to go through, because what if it doesn't? And that's a very real possibility. So my concern is, let's regulate for the situation we have now, and if it changes, we can change it later. If we feel like it's necessary to change it later.
Just to clarify, this map, I think, includes the daycares and childcare centers, right, which isn't included in the draft here.
Places
So
where children congregate.
it doesn't, it kicks out more area than actually would be prevented under the ordinance. So it's a little bit, I think this is an older.
So what are we looking at here? And I guess that's my question, Jamie.
There's no key.
A map showing 500-foot buffers around all of the.
Please.
It's a map showing the 500-foot buffers around all of the educational facilities in the school, including nursery, pre-K, Easthampton Public Schools, the Hilltown Cooperative Charter Public School, Tri-County School, Milliston Northampton School, and it's surrounding their properties that they own, not necessarily the location of the buildings.
Right.
So you'll see that Williston Northampton has a number of properties. They have sports fields, and all of that would be included in their buffer around, in this case, a 500-foot buffer.
Can you zoom into Cottage and Union Street, please? So, that
all of
green.
So I think if you look right where the DB is, up by the Rotary, like that,
Yeah.
I think is like Young World
Right.
and Our Lady, like all that green area, I think comes away. So it's a little bit.
Big
But
It's
it
hard to
does-
use this.
It does look like Union and Cottage.
We don't.
For the discussion?
No, because the removal of the pre-K and nursery stuff is just in the latest draft, and it's not.
Which is from the state regs.
Right, which is not in the maps that we have the planning department prepare.
Might be nice if we had.
But
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
it does look like, if I can see this correctly, it does look like Union and Cottage are out.
Right,
looking
and then
at
you
this?
have to assume that possibly a single storefront might be available in those spaces where the buffer doesn't exist.
Right.
The other thing I'll say too is I disagree with the notion that everyone will be driving these locations. And one thing that's nice about our city, especially people coming from who live near downtown or precinct 3, is that they actually have the ability to be able to walk to businesses downtown.
Or ride their bike.
Or ride their bike, or hoverboard, but those are dangerous. But yeah, I mean, my biggest concern, again, I absolutely agree with the need to protect our youth. I question what buffer zones do to protect our youth, but the other thing that I will say from this map is what they clearly will do is basically eliminate our ability to really offer fair storefronts to incoming business.
Right, and that's the discussion we had too, was really how do you balance that, because.
It's all about balance and compromise.
Yep, so.
And so just to clarify, I did go out with a wheel and walk it. And at 350 feet, it does, from center school, it takes out about half of Union Street.
By path of travel?
By path of travel. So you're basically looking at the snap side to the Rite Aid gone, to about like Manchester's, halfway down, like into Manchester's parking lot. So it does take out a significant portion at 350 feet, but there are some spaces that would still be available on the lower portion.
So the one last thing I would just say, I still stand by our request for 500 feet.
Yeah.
The one last thing I would say is, just like there is a cap to liquor licenses, please put a cap on this license. Don't just let it be open-ended.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's fair.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Cynthia Kuzinski?
Can I just jump in?
Sure.
Mayoral privilege. I just want to put on one, just consideration, wonderful conversation, and so well thought of on all sides. Our city planner, who's actually on payroll per diem, and coming on in March, and I talked, he's on vacation now, and I would just like the joint boards to consider having another hearing like this as he's preparing answers to some of the more technical things that have coming up, and he's working very closely with the commission that might shed some light on what we're talking about tonight. And he offers, just tell him when and where. Just was on vacation this week, so.
I think there's no chance we'll get through that list tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we had received that request from Jeff as well. I think that
Okay,
that's,
great.
I personally think that's reasonable.
Okay,
As long as-
wanted to get
let's
on the
try to
record.
next week.
I'm thinking Monday, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's cross that bridge a
Well, he
little
said
later.
Here we
But
go.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, Cynthia.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Kwasinski. I am a resident. I live at 47 Hannibrook Drive. I am a teacher, and I am the chair of the school committee. I want to start out by addressing Councilor Zaret's comments tonight. You mentioned that you got feedback that was prejudicial, discriminatory, and insulting. You also touched on some concerns that parents had that were a little bit outrageous. And I just want to say, before I start with the specifics that I will get to, that I have been talking to parents and educators in this city, and I have not once heard a single disparaging, insulting, prejudicial, discriminatory remark from a single parent, nor have I heard a single outrageous, foolish, unthought of comment or concern about drug use. No one is making outrageous comments. What I have heard from parents and educators is, number one, Many of them, 2/3, voted to approve recreational cannabis use in Easthampton. Absolutely. They also voted for the city council that is now sitting here and will be making this final decision. They trusted that the city council would protect their concerns, and I'm going to give you two of their concerns. One, they want this to stay away from their schools. Every parent I have spoken to wants to hold on to that 500-foot buffer. Now, you've heard, I went last week to the Ordinance Subcommittee meeting. Our city planner begged you not to give up that 500-foot buffer. Once you give up that buffer, you've given it up for good. You can always reduce it later on, so he wanted to make a statement before he could not be at tonight's meeting, and he asked you to consider holding on to the 500-foot buffer for this year. And if it turns out that you do not feel you need that buffer later on, if the city is happy with the way things are going, then you can always shrink that buffer. But if you start smaller, you cannot go bigger. 2, parents want a slow start. And I will, over the next few weeks, continue to reach out to parents and educators. I can see a number of them in the audience. I have some letters from people. I will continue to reach out, but what I have heard from every parent and educator that I have talked to is they want you to start slow. They would like 4 licenses. They don't care whether they're retail or recreational use, but they believe that there is going to be an impact in this city that we don't know. It's easy to say there's going to be no impact. This is going to be great for the city. Most cities are recommending a slow start. You have the AG's office recommending a slow and steady start. You have police chiefs across the state recommending a slow and steady start because we don't know exactly what we're going to have to deal with. A slow and steady start also gives, you talked about education, it gives schools a chance to catch up to the program and the needs of our youth. If you just dump a bunch of sites and we shrink this buffer and then we have a bad repercussion, we are not going to be able to fix it. But if we start slow, if we begin with 4 licenses, if we hold on to that buffer and we find that we don't need it, that everything is great, wonderful, we'll open it up. The city will support it. They already supported it with a 2/3 vote. But there is a third that did not vote for it, and I can tell you the 2/3 that did, those parents want that 500-foot buffer, and not for foolish reasons, not for prejudicial reasons, because they know that this is something new for their children in their city. They also are all asking for 4 licenses, which is why the school committee ended up asking for 4. Because we're listening to the people who voted for us and put their trust in us. And I'm asking that you all think about the people who put their trust in you. I've heard that, oh, nobody's showing up for these meetings, so they all agree with everything that's going on. That's not true. As people begin to hear what you are putting forward, they are starting to build steam. They want to come. They want their opinions heard. So I believe you're going to see more and more attendance as we go along, because people do care. And there are a lot of very rational, respectful, young families who want that 500-foot buffer and want a slow and steady start beginning at 4. So I have a letter from a nurse. I have a letter with a teenage son. I have another letter from another family on Carillon. They're all asking for the same thing. Keep that 500-foot buffer, start with 4. And I'm really wondering, since we have I know Maren and I worked really hard on those maps to look at what a 500-foot buffer would do to the city. You will not be harmed. Easthampton will not be harmed if we hold on to that 500-foot buffer. There will still be numerous sites across this city where this will be accepted and flourish. So if we're not going to harm anybody by having a slow start, by holding on to that buffer, why wouldn't we do it? Why wouldn't we do what's best for our families, what's best for our kids? You've got recommendations from schools. You have teachers. I know there's going to be more teachers and more parents as time goes on. So I will give you a copy of these letters, but I urge you to realize that people are not overreacting, that the people who want the 4 sites and the 500-foot buffer are very respectful, intelligent, concerned, rational families and voters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Question. First off, I just want to say you're incredibly eloquent, and I'm proud that you're working for our city in the capacity that you are. That was
Thank
well
you.
done. My question is about the buffers. I don't want a buffer. We disagree. I think we want the same thing. We want to protect the kids, but I see the education doing it and not the buffers. I respect that you and others, I fully accept that, want the buffer. I acquiesced at the planning board component to get it to 200 feet. That was giving for me because I see no need. Now it's up to 350. I've given twice. You want 500. Are you willing to give?
Okay. Yeah, I'm willing to give because some cities are actually asking for 2,000-foot buffers. I happen to know one very close that is asking for a 2,000-foot buffer.
We're mandated in Massachusetts not to go over 500.
Right. Denver is asking for 1,000-foot. Washington has, you're right, Massachusetts is compromising, and they're starting with 5. That's a compromise on its own. You know, I've spent my entire life working with teenagers. Before I was a teacher, I was a counselor for abused adolescents. The preteen mind and the teenage mind, I know, and I'm committed to these kids. The buffer helps as a messaging to teenagers. If you are walking to pick up your younger brother or sister, and close to where you are walking is a facility that has a message to it. And please don't tell me that kids will not know where these facilities are. Preteens and teens are so savvy. They will know the first day any place opens, and they will Facebook and let every single member of their friends and peer group know where these places are. There is a message as you go to and from school that says, I'm passing liquor, I'm passing smoking signs, and I'm passing a cannabis retail place or a social cannabis cafe. Kids are going to know that as they go to and from to pick up siblings, as they pass school. That message is very subtle, but it's extremely powerful. If I could stop, and if you know how to, believe me, I will support you and I will get as many parents behind. If you want to stop the advertisements for cigarettes, I will be there with you and I will get as many people as I can to help you do that. If you want to get rid of the advertisements or, for alcohol that I see posted, I applaud that.
So this is a no flex point for you.
No giving.
giving.
We can't do anything about it. It was grandfathered in. If I could change it, I would. I can't. So to say that we need to make the same mistake twice, who knows? Maybe it won't be a mistake. I am not promising you that it won't be, but I am asking you, why take the chance? Why not hold on to that buffer? Why not start slow and then proudly, as the city of Easthampton, say, hey, we did it right. We did it right the first time. And look how great our city is. Let's keep going.
So your concern about the kids is that they're going to walk by an establishment on their way to school or picking up sibling, and they're gonna see an establishment, and they're gonna think it's okay to smoke marijuana when they become an adult?
No.
Okay, so is it that they're gonna be okay with it 500 feet away instead of 300 feet?
Preteens and teens have it on their mind anyway.
Yeah.
Okay? I am talking about messaging as you come and go. If the first thing and the last thing you're thinking of when you're getting out of school is that messaging, even alcohol, you hurt no one with a buffer. You don't. I mean, part of Union Street is open. Part of Cottage Street is open. Pleasant Street is open. Route 10 is open. There are plenty of sites where we're going to be able to do this. No one that I've spoken to is talking about not doing this. I have not heard one person, maybe I'm talking to the right people, but I am talking to people who are supportive of this.
Mm-hmm.
They simply want to, one, use that buffer. It's recommended. Professionals are telling you that buffer will work. Now, we can argue all day. I can tell you as an educator that it makes a difference. I talk to kids every day. I talk to preteens every day, and I have for years. You've heard from Williston. You've heard from the Youth Coalition. You've heard from professionals who talk to kids every day.
Yeah.
And they are all asking for a 500-foot buffer. Can we all be wrong? Do we all not know our business? Are we all foolishly worried about something that doesn't exist? Or could it be that we make some sense and that we harm you, not at all, by asking for that buffer?
I think you make good points. I wonder if the state regs came out with a 1,000-foot buffer, if you'd be asking for a 1,000-foot buffer.
Personally, I don't think I would, okay?
Okay.
I think 500, and I've looked. Maren and I spent a lot of time together this weekend looking at maps and looking at the city to try to be reasonable. You talk about making compromises. We have really worked hard to be reasonable and to be able to say, because if we had looked and it turned out, well, you know, we're really going to be shutting down the city, so maybe we would have had to rethink it somehow. But it's possible. It's possible in many sites across the city.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. Just so I think probably for our next meeting, we probably should have a corrected map for 500 feet.
I agree.
So that we can really have actual data, so we're not
I would like to see a
hypothesizing.
map. I mean, we've kind of tweaked some, and we can share what we've done.
Yeah.
But it would be great if you have new guidelines that are going to open up different parts of the city. We would we'd be very happy to see them.
I think it'd be good to show 350 versus 500.
Jamie, how complicated is that?
Depending on when the next meeting is, I can, right now, I'm the only one who's in the planning department.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you. All right,
Thank you.
thank
So
you
I
very
thank
much.
you, but I really urge you to think, to listen to the parents in your city and to the professionals who are begging you to do these things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say publicly that if my statement made anyone infer that I was calling them foolish, that wasn't the intent, and I could submit the transcript of what I read earlier. It does not include the word foolish. What I was talking about was that I think what Chris was touching on is that when we insinuate things about legal businesses based on how they make us feel, then that's prejudicial. It's not factual. That was all.
Oh, and I would recommend that our teachers and that our education system should go through some cannabis sensitivity training so that they'll become able to identify when they're hearing statements that are, racially complex.
Can I speak to that?
No. Sorry, we gotta keep moving. JP.
Can I yield a moment of my time? Yield a minute.
I promise to be short. The demand on our schools is unbelievable. As a teacher and a school committee member, I can tell you we are asking more and more on a daily basis of our teachers and our educators and our school systems. It is very easy to say that it's the job of the parents or the job of a school to do the education and that we need to take those trainings. I can tell you, number one, all the districts already are. We're working on all this. We have to work on so many issues. It would make your head explode. It really would. Okay, between gun violence and school safety and bullying. So we're working on all these issues, and we are training our teachers. But we have to, as town administrators and caretakers, we have to do something too. This is an easy thing for you to do, okay? We're doing our part, and the schools are doing their part, and parents are doing their best. So I'm asking you guys to do your best too. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I won't get out of hand.
James Kwasinski, Easthampton, City Councilor. I guess I would ask you to continue your hard work, and I hope listen to the public as you balance the various interests of the city, which will be brought to the City Council for final resolution. So much to talk about. I guess let's start with, if I had a magic wand, I know there's been many comparisons made to liquor licenses, alcohol, and cannabis, and advertising. I believe that advertisers advertise, that marketers market, and one of their principles is repetition. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So the more times they can have everyone, youth, adults, listen to their ads, the messages, more everything seems like it's all okay and good, and we'll partake in it. Let's take, for example, the signs that happen to be near one of our schools at the end of Cottage Street, the signs for alcohol and cigarettes. If I had a magic wand, I would say, listen, get rid of them. They don't belong where children are located. Fortunately, none of us right now can do anything about that past. We can project into the future and hope to do the best for our entire city. Two wrongs don't make a right. If it's wrong to put up smoking ads in front of kids for repetition, to have alcohol be located, to have other mind-altering, mind-expanding be continued time after time after time, I think there's reason to have buffers. I believe in a buffer. I believe in a 500-foot buffer. The question about, well, our business interests are so important. Business interests, children's interests. We have to balance that. That'll be our jobs. Believe me, I'm a fan of business. I think we all are here. I think we like to see Easthampton thrive. So the question becomes having an appropriate map. I asked our planning department for a map that gave us, so we could discuss intelligently this matter and show us exactly what areas are available, and was unable to obtain that map today. Granted, we're on short staff, we're between people. I hope we're able to have a map. But let me say this, I've studied this map well. In the downtown area, all of Main Street is available. Let me repeat that. In the DB district, all of Main Street is available. There are places on Cottage Street and on Union Street which still fit the criteria. But let's say that wasn't the case. Let's say we thought it appropriate to have just other districts have recreational marijuana. Okay? Let's look at the Highway Business District. 100% of the Highway Business District is unimpacted by a 500-foot buffer. Let's look at the Industrial District. The only area that's affected is Industrial Drive. There is a school there, a charter school. And it affects about 9 parcels of land. Okay? The rest of the industrial district is available. All of the Mill Industrial District is available. We have eliminated the daycares. We've eliminated childcare. We've eliminated so much from that map that we looked at today. What we are only considering is K through 12 schools. Okay. Does it eliminate any of the mill industrial? No. I would share with folks, these are the number of parcels that are acceptable according to a 500-foot buffer. I'll read to you, I know you can't see it. In the industrial district, it's about 95 parcels of land. In the highway business district, it's almost 80, 78.
Those are open parcels we're talking about? Or
We're talking about, when you zone, you don't zone open or unopened parcels. You zone a district. So we're talking about zoning a district.
Okay.
How many parcels are in the district? In the mill industrial, there are 52 parcels. Let's translate that just for a moment. That's almost 500 acres of land in this city where you can set up recreational marijuana. Let's just take for a moment the Mill Industrial District. When we're looking at the Mill Industrial District, Eastworks, I believe, have 500,000 square feet. 500,000 square feet. So if we enact a 500-foot buffer, seems pretty reasonable to me that there's areas in our downtown business district that would fit. There are areas on Cottage, Main, Union. There are areas in 3 other districts and over 500 acres that would fit. We're not really being hugely discriminatory about where we're allowing business. This is wide open.
Except, JP, just to...
500 acres. Let me finish. May I finish?
There's a buffer between spaces, just to remind you.
Sure, okay. I mean, these are estimates. These are, we didn't have access to the full data today, which I had hoped to be able to bring to you with maps that showed exactly what the area was. So we're kind of working with some estimates. But I think you'll find them, in general, pretty accurate. Let's look at the number of retail. Folks are asking us to move at a good pace for the benefit of the entire city. 4 licenses. Does not seem to me underly it seems to me to be appropriate, and I would endorse 4 licenses. I differ from somebody who shares my address on social consumption. I have a lot of questions, and I'm not sure we should be pursuing any social consumption. I'm open to discussion about this, so if folks would like to continue that discussion elsewhere, I'm happy to talk with anybody, because I do keep an open mind until I vote. All right, let's look at social consumption. The latest from the Attorney General, here's a letter that was written. I'd like to quote from that, if I may. It was written from the Attorney General's office this week. And the nutshell of the note is, no place in this country allows social consumption in the way that it's being proposed here. I need to quote exactly from the letter, and I apologize, but that gives me great pause about social consumption. So, what does it mean to have social consumption? Does that mean, okay, we have social consumption, we can go to a restaurant? Okay, fine, we can go to a restaurant and eat cannabis-infused product, right? And that's what social consumption in part means. Let me back up a step and look at the initiative petition in the election. I would say that of the 60 or so % who voted in favor, they weren't thinking of social consumption as part of what. I'm not saying everybody. I'm saying there are people who would say, wait a minute. What I voted for was, hey, in the privacy of your home, we have a retail site. We want to offer an opportunity to take this off a black market. Go ahead, come in, buy at the retail site. Go ahead and however you want to have people over the house, do what you want to do. But the idea of being able to go to a restaurant came as a surprise. Okay, let's look at the restaurant. Let's say you sit down, you go out to dinner with some people. Are we talking about, well, we're going to only serve cannabis-infused product? Or are we going to have a menu of both cannabis-infused product and non-cannabis-infused product, what we all think of as going to a restaurant and eating out? All right, what's the portion control? I don't know if there are standards that have been set up for portion control for restaurants that just all seems so fast, so quick.
To address that, JP, there are. They've discussed serving sizes.
Serving sizes in restaurants, and that's part of what?
Any
edible.
Within any edible that can be consumed in a social consumption site, and there will be limits to serving sizes.
Is there take home?
No.
Can I, well, how do you, what if I go to a restaurant and I don't want cannabis-infused product, or I do?
Yeah, the CCC has done a great job.
All right, folks.
Let me just say, all right, so you can't take it home. Does that mean nobody can take home any food from any of those locations? So if you go out to eat there and you buy something that is non-cannabis infused, there will be no takeout.
No, you'll be able to.
If it's not cannabis.
If it's not cannabis infused, you'll be able to take it with you.
So if you have social consumption and if it's not cannabis infused, you can take it home.
JP, if it'll make you happy, I could pull up the draft regulations and you can ask questions and I can answer off of that if you'd like.
I think if you think of it like a bar, if you step outside onto the street with your beer, you've got an open container violation. If you walk out there with your Coke, maybe you stole the glass, but you're not running afoul of bringing your Coke on the street.
All I'm
So I
wondering
think
is
it's
how do you
gonna be something
distinguish who had food
Coca-Cola.
that had cannabis and who had food that didn't have cannabis in terms of letting somebody out the door? If you're saying we're going to keep strict restrictions and you consume on site.
JP, I'm just curious what part of the zoning we're looking at right now. I guess I'm a little confused.
I'm looking at the social consumption part and I'm questioning what does it mean to have social consumption in terms of how is the regulation enforced? If you're saying people will not take this home, how do you enforce? I'm asking, how do we begin to enforce that? I think it's a little much to be asking Easthampton to lead the way on this particular aspect. But others may disagree, and we'll come to a decision on that. To the
Gesundheit.
will there be security going in? I guess I assume that there is in terms of any retail site that you have to present. How is that going to work? You can't get in?
They will present
Special permit process.
as part of the permit.
And we as
So
a
we don't
planning
know
board
exactly.
will review it.
I mean, right now in the medical marijuana, there's a card reader, and you're required to stay outside until.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it'll be similar to that.
probably.
Well, or there'll be posted security. I mean, when I was in Denver, there was actual bouncers at the door.
As part of the special permit process, the planning board will review that.
Yeah, review their
And because it's
proposal.
part of the criteria on our checklist, we'll go through it. And if we don't like what we hear as a board, like with any other special permit for that component that we're required to check off, then we'll send them back to make specific modifications as we would with any special permit.
Anything, yep.
Okay, good. I was just wondering, because if people there are lines out, I mean, I imagine there's going to be some demand for the product.
Yep.
And folks are going to be waiting in line outside, and we could have lines, we could have issues of traffic.
I
So
Absolutely.
there's-
That's why they have to submit a queuing plan, and that's a good point.
It's a big concern.
So I'm looking at that and I'm wondering, okay, do you have to swipe a card to say I'm 21 to be able to get in? Okay, I have to show my ID to get in. You're going to decide.
Yep.
or we're gonna decide
And the
by
state
putting it
regs,
into
and
the
the
ordinance.
final version of the state regs will have further requirements about that as well. But yeah, I mean, the requirement is they have to demonstrate under this draft, they would have to demonstrate as part of their application, among other things, sort of their system for ensuring that no one under 21 enters. So that may be a card swipe system, that may be a bouncer at the door, that may be, I can't imagine any other systems, but they'll have some other way that they'll present, and that will either be sufficient or not, and that will determine either they'll change their plan or it wouldn't be approved for a
They'll
special
do it
permit.
just like any bar, they'll check ID at the
Right.
door, like any other club. I mean, they'll check ID in Denver, it was twice. 2 checks of ID before you even get, there's multiple doorways even to get into the room that has the cannabis. And at each doorway, you check ID again.
Sounds good. I do appreciate the odors and gases being included there, Councilor Zaret. I think that's an appropriate way of continuing to extend the protections of what's outside the building. Those are basically tonight. I know other people would like to speak, so I'll try to be brief here. Essentially, I'll reiterate that the Attorney General's letter said, please, to the Cannabis Control Commission, put on hold social consumption for the time being. So my recommendation is that we have 4 licenses, and those 4 licenses not include social consumption. In terms of a whole nother section, and I'll leave it, there's an area of concern about, of home delivery that we didn't even begin to address, and I think that's included in there. That is the home delivery from, I'll read this, the number of sites. The home delivery, but on that note, we'll continue the discussion, I hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, JP.
Where are we going?
Midnight.
Jackie Duda's next. I'd like to do her, and then we could talk about continuing. Jackie Duda?
You made it.
At the next hearing, I'm gonna sit there, so I can be second on the
People
list.
that-
I'm starting to figure this out.
Go a couple more.
Good evening, I'm your city's health, health agent, tired health agent. So you've had a daunting task, and I have to say, I'm glad that I'm not on your committee, because I don't know how I would have approached making such a regulation. When 6 years ago, this discussion about recreational marijuana came up, and I knew it was going to be on boards of health to create regulations, I was terrified. So nobody was happier that the state took it upon themselves to license and regulate the dispensaries than health agents across the state, because we don't need any more daunting tasks. And I really admire that you seem to have done a very comprehensive job, even though there's a lot of debate. I'm not here to debate with you. I want to just make some notes about housekeeping issues that have come up through this discussion, because most of what I was going to say has already been more eloquently stated by people before me. So first, I do, though, support going slowly. I was very fascinated by a day-long training I attended a couple of months ago that was presented by the head of the health department in Denver. And she talked about their states and their health department's learning curve when they first made legal recreational marijuana. That was a daunting task. So my first message, and I'm so glad people before me have said the same thing, is go slowly, is a very, very good message. And I think that 4 is a great starting point, if not less. We don't know what the learning curve is going to be. We don't know what we're going to encounter. And I can tell you that being the one 34-hour health department in the city doesn't have the ability to respond quickly to learning curves like this. So please don't overtax the city services. So that message is very clear from others. Second, let me just clarify the workplace smoking law. The workplace smoking law defines smoking as the lighting of a cigar, cigarette, pipe, or other tobacco product, or possessing a lighted cigar, cigarette, pipe, or other tobacco or non-tobacco product designed to be combusted or inhaled. So it already covers the smoking of any marijuana product. So no smoking of any kind, vaping or inhaling, of any kind is allowed under the workplace smoking law as it is currently defined. As far as buffers, I'm not going to comment on that, but I will say that somebody made brought up a question earlier about if there was any other city regulation on buffers. Well, there is. The Board of Health has created its own tobacco regulations. Maybe you're aware that boards of health may create reasonable regulations. Under Mass General Law, we are allowed to make our own regulations to protect public health. And we have a set of tobacco regulations. In fact, Easthampton was the first city, or one of the very first cities, to regulate tobacco in their community. And we've been a leader in that respect for many, many years. So we have a 200-foot buffer. Again, I'm not debating if that's good or bad, but just for consistency purposes, that's what we have. The idea of a cap on permits is a really interesting and intriguing idea to me. We had discussed capping tobacco permits, and in this most recent regulation on tobacco, we capped the permits at 17. What we didn't do is eliminate that permit as it expired. So it will always be 17. It'll never decrease. But a cap is not a bad idea. I mean, you only need so many places to sell tobacco. You only need so many places to sell cannabis. And the final message I have is that a lot of the wording in this regulation, especially in the definition part, at least in the version I read, seems to be taken word for word from the proposed state regulation the Commission has presented. So I would just say to you that just like this is a debate, the Cannabis Control Commission has been having hearings all over the state, and there's been a lot of feedback, and they're digesting it. So there are going to be changes to that regulation. So if you model yours word for word after theirs in some sections, I would just caution you to wait to see what's going to happen there, instead of reinventing the wheel. And those are my comments.
Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Do we have appetite for some more?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Jesse,
All right.
Jesse, there were 2 comments that were submitted electronically. I don't know if you want to read.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the ones in the room for now, but thanks for reminding me, Jamie. Amber Isa? 62 Line Street, Southampton. Somebody left already? All right.
Sleep in the back.
Tom Peak.
Pro marijuana.
Hi everyone, Tom Peak, 53 Holyoke Street. I'm the Precinct 3 City Councilor. I really enjoyed this conversation over the last couple hours because there's a lot of things that people have said that I might agree with or I might disagree with, but one thing that's really obvious is that there's a whole lot of people in this room who really, really care about our community, and that ultimately we're sort of, in many cases, we're talking about some of the finer details, right? And the fact that you can have people having passionate debate over what is essentially finer details, whether it goes your way or not, is the sign of a healthy civic society, and I think that that's really good. So speaking as the Precinct 3 City Councilor, I represent a good deal of Cottage Street. That's the only portion of my precinct which is zoned in a way that would allow for these sorts of businesses. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And when I was reading the ordinance, which Councilor Derby was generous enough to forward to me, one thing that I noticed is that as it currently stands, outside of the mill industrial area, the only structures that will accommodate a cannabis business are structures that do not have any residential units in them, which if you just envision walking down Cottage Street and then up Union Street, that's the majority of them do. I understand the logic behind that, and I'm not asking for any change on that, but I do think that when we have this sort of fine nitty-gritty discussion about buffers, I'd like to propose a framework. I personally am fairly agnostic about buffers. I haven't seen any strong evidence personally that they keep kids safe, That being said, I understand the concerns of the community, and if they want to take this slowly, I don't necessarily have a problem with that either. So I'm fairly agnostic, but as we hammer out these details, here is the way that I would propose you look at this. Look at all the buildings on Union and Cottage Street that do not have second floor residential units. It'll be a lot easier that way because there's about 20 of them, about 20 storefronts total. You know, you're looking at the space that the Corsellos have, you're looking at the area where Off the Map is, and then you go a little bit further and there's some stuff past the Brass Cat, and then I guess there's the 2 shopping plazas on Union Street, and there's the hardware store, and there's the place where Shelburne Falls Coffee Roasters is. That's basically what we're talking about in like on Union and Cottage Street, which is the area that we're debating here, right? We're really talking about 20 units. And so look at that with the various different sized buffers. Look at that with different ways of calculating those buffers. I will say that personally, I'm a big fan of the idea of making sure that it's door-to-door regular path of travel, because we, like many New England cities, are kind of weird shaped, and there could be a lot of things that as the crow flies are 150 feet away, but it takes you 700 feet to actually walk there from a school because there's a big fence over here. And you know, just to give a sense, like if you're talking about like the schools, you know, out back, like, you know, they're technically abutting like the plaza where the Rite Aid and the Subway are and whatnot. But to actually get there, you'd have to walk all the way down in one direction or the other and then come around. So this is how I would personally recommend approaching this discussion as you hammer out the finer details on this, is say, if we do it like this, how many storefronts are we actually talking about? If we do it like this, how many actual storefronts are we talking about? And I think that might be an approach that could help us reach like a conclusion that's based a little bit less on emotions, a little bit more on just facts. And that goes for both sides, frankly. Like, let's figure out what we can do that will allow the most storefronts that we can, with most people feeling that they can kind of live with that. I have one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and I went back and forth on this because it didn't really come up a lot during this, but you know, I had missed the last meeting and I knew that there was a good deal of talk about edibles. And so I wanted to briefly share my own experience. I was born with a hereditary form of epilepsy. I take epilepsy meds twice a day. They suck. I take medical marijuana to help deal with the side effects. I'm not on medical marijuana right now, but sometimes in the evenings, in order to help relax, help go to bed, I do take medical marijuana. When I do that, I've found that for me, the most safe and effective way for me to do that is by edibles, because the actual dosage is precisely measured out. For anyone who has any experience smoking marijuana, they probably have at least a couple occasions where they took too big of a puff, they didn't mean to, and suddenly they're a lot more affected by it than they thought they would be. That being said, I am receptive to some of the concerns that people have in the community about children mistaking them for candy, or children getting into them being proliferated. I brought something that I hope might be able to help you guys, because it's occurred to me that some of you probably have never actually seen the current Massachusetts standards for medical marijuana packaging, and I realized I had an empty bottle. Of course, I wouldn't bring marijuana into the school building, but I have an empty bottle, and I want to give it as a gift to the counselors so that they can take a look. There's no product in here, obviously, but you can look at what the labeling is, what the child-proofness is, and maybe you look at it and you say, oh, this section needs to be more really specific. It needs to say, because right here it says over here, medicated cannabis chews. Maybe it's kind of too small wording. Maybe you want to update that. Maybe you want to be really specific about the child-proofing mechanism. I definitely think that for a lot of people, it's a safe and effective way to use marijuana, but I also think that if people have this would be the time to address them. So I was going to give this to share to you guys, so you could take a look at it. I don't need it back. Just if you wanted to, just to see what the current industry standard is, and if you think that you need to do anything else, you can.
If I bring it home, my wife's
Thank you.
going to ask questions.
Okay, so that's all for me. Thanks for the time, and thanks for all the hard work you're doing.
Thanks
Thanks
so
to
much.
everyone who
Good
came
points.
out. I really appreciate it all.
Karima?
Thank you, Tom. They're going to go non-business over.
Thank you so much for letting a variety of us come up, so I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. My name is Karima Risk, and I live at 38 Everett Street in Easthampton, Massachusetts. I'm an Easthampton homeowner, voter, taxpayer, volunteer, wife, and mother to 2 public children. And I think actually at that point, I want to pause because I want to say the folks who came up and said they have fears for marijuana, I don't stand in that camp. And respectfully so, I heard the first speaker say that they were speaking on behalf of the children of Easthampton. And I have my own values, and I too want to protect the children. I am very invested in this, both as a parent, truly, as someone who loves and wants to see the character of this community maintained, but also as a business owner. I take that responsibility very seriously. So, but I also don't want to make the over-assumption that you've heard from a lot of people in the school industry, and I've heard from a lot of other people who have not had an opportunity to speak, who are parents, who do support this. So I want to just be careful in getting into I have these letters, you have these letters, tit for tat kind of a thing. There's a variety, there's a wide diversity on that. I'm also the founder and CEO of Cafe Vert, a female minority-owned coffee house in Easthampton where adults may gather to socialize and exchange ideas about the science, culture, history, and politics of cannabis through fact-based education, quality programming, and special interest classes. Cafe Vert has a lease in the Keystone Mill and is undertaking fundraising activities and in discussions with municipal stakeholders. This spring, a subsidiary of Cafe Vert will apply for Massachusetts retail and primary use social consumption recreational marijuana licenses. I would like to offer the following comments as a parent, a small business owner, and someone who fervently loves Easthampton. Firstly, I'd like to thank and recognize the Planning Board, Easthampton Planning Board, and the City Council Zoning Ordinance Committee for all the hard work and strong leadership each of the committees has shown since the first meeting held on August 1st, 2017. I appreciate that the Easthampton government has allowed for extensive 7 months of public comment period and for transparency through video coverage, thanks to Easthampton Media, and by holding 8, I counted them, public Planning Board hearings to discuss this topic, as well as 2 public ordinance subcommittee meetings, not to mention a working meeting and then as well as today's hearing, as well as many others. So thank you and your dedication for this important topic and providing many months to comment on this topic. Secondly, I'd like to applaud the inclusion and preservation thus far of social consumption businesses in Easthampton's draft recreational marijuana zoning ordinance. Social consumption is both a civil rights and a social justice issue that disproportionately impacts veterans, federal low-income housing residents, and the homeless, as well as many people who privately rent homes. The truth is that many of these Massachusetts residents may be prevented from consuming or possessing marijuana in their homes, and thus do not have the same equitable access to recreational marijuana as homeowners. Additionally, over 1 million cannabis tourists are projected to visit Massachusetts in 2019. Most of these tourists will likewise have nowhere legally to consume marijuana and are prohibited from doing so in hotels and in public. Furthermore, responsible parents may not wish to consume marijuana with children in their households. Providing social consumption venues is the socially responsible action to take. A common problem that follows legal recreational marijuana sales is that marijuana becomes covertly smoked in parks, on bike trails, and in parking lots. Having a safe, private space with the proper ventilation and odor filtration is the best solution that balances civil rights and community respect. And Massachusetts is not alone in licensing social consumption. I heard this point before, and I'd actually counter that in saying, actually, California, Nevada, Colorado, and Maine have all taken steps to legalize social consumption, and they are further along the way. In fact, as of now in the news, there is another coffee house in Denver that's pending social consumption licensing. It's called the Coffee Joint. So this is happening around the country and being discussed and legislated. Finally, it's important to note that social consumption businesses have additional responsibilities above and beyond what other marijuana establishments may have, such as third-party transportation plans, briefly mentioned before, to assist patients with safe driving, and written procedures to help ensure patrons are not overserved as part of their licensing application. And I would just pause here and say that many of us have been very well involved in this, and I see again and again key players who have gaps of knowledge in the law as to what these mean, how these businesses are run, and it's very clearly spelled out in the draft regulations. I would be more than happy, as part of my own mission, to help anyone, any city councilor, to find those, to answer questions. I'd love to have a conversation with you after. I'd love to have, same with Councilor Risk. There are many of these points they've raised, but they are already addressed in the published regulations. So we just want to be careful that everyone is educated. And it's certainly a high bar to set. Also, I just really briefly want to touch upon lawsuit, because certainly Jeff Bagg mentioned this, other folks have mentioned about the fear of a lawsuit and the debate over social consumption, whether or not there's a ballot issue. Likewise, I would like to say I've been in touch with people in Boston and lobbyists on that end, and I have been told there may be lawsuits on the other side because social consumption is explicitly written into the law. My point is not that you should do this because you may be fearful of a lawsuit, but my point is that we should not legislate around lawsuit for this or that. They can go either way. We need to have bold leadership and take action based on the information we have. What our community needs more than anything is actually fact-based information, preferably from a variety of credible sources. We face a steep learning curve in the early days of recreational marijuana, and all residents, especially parents, should read and understand both our new laws and rights. As someone who has worked in medical marijuana in Massachusetts, I can tell you it is very unlikely that a child under 21 would obtain marijuana from a licensed marijuana establishment. What is much more likely to happen, I want everyone to think about this, is that children will access the recreational marijuana in their homes, purchased by their parents or other adults in the household. This problem may also crop up with a friend who in the same way obtained it illegally from their household. But the issue becomes one of consumer education and parental responsibility. And I'm in this camp as a parent. I think this is a responsibility in the same way I have liquor. It is my responsibility to make sure my child does not get it. And I face the consequences if they take that to school. And while people have expressed fear and trepidation about the forthcoming change it brings, it is important to highlight that Massachusetts has some of the most stringent medical marijuana laws in the country, and many common sense, best practice safeguards are written into the regulations. I'll go through them very clearly, but I've heard this from other elected officials that are not aware of these. So these are in the law, they're already there. Briefly, the edibles must be in 5 milligram servings. That is half of what the minimum individual serving of Colorado, Nevada, and California are. So it's a very small dose, slow. Marijuana products, including edibles, must be locked in child-proof locking containers, as we briefly mentioned. Marijuana products, including edibles, have limits on their packaging, advertising, and prohibitions on bright colors. They must be opaque. They may not have, limits on imitations of existing consumer brands. So, as incorrectly I received an email from the Easthampton School District, I do not need to fear for KeyCat, because KeyCat will not happen in Massachusetts, maybe in other states, but they cannot copy that. I also want to mention that it's really important. I went to a Northampton Prevention Coalition meeting at Northampton Pediatrics Associates, because I really genuinely want to hear both sides of the conversation. And one thing that came in on this very point about consumer products is the entire discussion, while it was framed under marijuana, was about tobacco vaping and juuling and how they can get peanut butter and jelly flavors. And it's really important to recognize the tobacco vaping industry is in no way the marijuana vaping industry in Massachusetts. It's highly regulated, and it does not copy those standards. Additionally, there's many other, I don't want to take everyone's time with, cartoon characters, celebrities, minors. You can't use the word, you can't use the image, anything like that. Advertisements, the audience must be at least 81% or higher. The signage you would never know a marijuana establishment exists because signage, marketing, logos cannot have any images on there. At the most, it's usually a name and a very inconspicuous building. And the exterior design requirements, as we mentioned, are discrete. Windows must be opaque, and the customers cannot see in. Additionally, there's a series of locked doors, so it is truly like Fort Knox for all of those who have not been in there, with a series of locked doors to prevent people, and is not the children that are going to be getting in. So now is a perfect time for all of us as a community to begin having honest, age-appropriate conversations with our children and teens about what to expect and what your family values are on the issue. Now more than ever, kids need to hear from their parents and hear their parents' voices. Parents should take the time to understand the responsibilities of being a recreational marijuana user and form a plan for safe, responsible use, including a plan to prevent children's access to marijuana and locking up their products. I recommend investing in a good safe made for that purpose. There are many specifically designed. Lastly, I really briefly wanted to touch upon, some people have asked about why the rush. The community should know that if Massachusetts cities have no recreational marijuana zoning ordinance, by the time that the Cannabis Control Commission begins receiving marijuana applications from marijuana establishments by April 1st, whether pro or con, one way or another, the cities and towns will have no way, again, no way to regulate, pro or con, what marijuana businesses come to town and how they operate in time, manner, and place. Additionally, the city has spent over 7 months discussing these details, and the time is to act now. These have all been made public. I think people are starting to catch on the tail end, and the panic is starting to set in. There's a lot of change, but I do want to say these have all been in the news. They've been covered by Mary Cerise and Mass Live. They've been shared publicly many times. So there's been ample opportunity for people to contact, and those who can't come have also been welcome to email their city councilors and their planning board people for comments as well. I encourage those who can't be here to do so. So law enforcement, businesses, and residents all need municipal leadership to finalize and pass a robust recreational marijuana zoning ordinance. I'd like to thank each of you for taking the time to listen to my feedback. And also, I want to wish you personally the very best of luck in this historic task. You all have an important task in front of you, and I'm sure everybody else appreciate all the hard work you've put into it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Casey Corsello.
I am. Hi. It's been a long time since I've been here. Casey Corsello, 2 Torrey Way. I wear a couple hats. I'm a business owner here. We own Corsello Butcheria, which is on Cottage Street. I'm also a parent. I'm a former school committee member. And I first want to acknowledge you all for your hard work in this process. And I know some of you, and I know that you are parents, so I know that you do take the safety of our children. It's of utmost importance. So I just wanted to speak out to that. Even as a school committee member, I had some of you speak to us with such passion because you wanted safety in our schools. So, boy, I'm getting like really passionate here. So for me, that's not even a question. And so I think we all can agree that's important to us as a community, right? And I won't pretend that I'm informed that much on this issue, but what I do know is that I do trust you. And I know that you've done your due diligence, and I know that you've worked tirelessly to understand what's coming out from the regulations, and to be a leader in that, so that you're not being reactive. You're being responsible, so that you can kind of design what you want to see for our community, taking all of our community members into account. So I thank you for that. And as a business owner, having a lot of more people coming into our city would benefit me. And you know, in terms of buffer zones, I guess what comes to me is, you know, the area where you could have it on Cottage Street, there's an ice cream shop right there. So I'm wondering what that really would matter, right? And I leave it in your hands, right? So what you come up with is what I respect, because I know that you're taking everything into account. And so I also want to talk about permitting. Like, if you get a permit, it still takes you a long time to open your business. I mean, it took my husband and I a year. And sometimes I'm like, why did we do that? And the great thing about having a business is that we're part of a community. And with that, we can connect with our community members. We sponsored a basketball team. You know, and I know Karima personally. We worked on a committee to bring the cultural festival in the schools. So I trust Karima. And I know that she's done her due diligence. And so for me, you know, I think it's okay, right? And I think as a community member, a business member, someone who voted, and someone who's also been on the school committee, I trust that you've all done your work. And so I don't even question that you don't think about the safety of our kids. So I just wanted to say that, and I don't even question that Karima doesn't think about the safety of our kids. I think it's an opportunity that we can learn and we can be leaders and we can change kind of the course of this conversation. And you know what to do. But having the revenue that we could have potentially build the new school, which is important to me, the safety of my kids and the building that they're in, that's important to me too. So I just want to say that nothing is either or. Like, I think it's a both and. And that's really with your mindful approach. I'm not gonna question it. I'm not gonna question it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Casey.
It's 9.
It's 9.
Yeah.
9:01 actually.
All right. So I think we do need to continue this.
Yep.
And I apologize for anyone who was on the list that didn't get a chance. And I'll keep this list and start with those people at the next meeting.
I guess the question is, when is the next meeting?
I was going to propose Monday.
Well, I just want to recap shortly. So the things that I heard that we need to focus on at the next meeting before we set it up is thinking about the zone, if we can get a zoning map together, and we'll figure that out if we can once we set up the next meeting. Not a zoning map, a buffer map with the 350 feet versus 500 feet. Maybe we can show the 500 feet and see how that will impact our downtown district. I think that we need to focus on the number of establishments and really focus on what that might be. And that would address maybe the starting slow and taking it slow that people I've heard, and I hear it, and I think it's valid. And I think if we look at the number of establishments, maybe we can address that.
And maybe a cap too.
And a cap, which I think is an excellent idea. Right, so I think that those are the things we start with. We look at trying to figure that out, and then we can, hear the rest of the people again and just keep moving in that way. That's really kind of the biggest thing I heard.
I would definitely like to toss in 10.106C and coming up with some better language there. That's important to me. And in tapping on or adding on to what you were saying, there was a comment, I think, from Tom about the specific buildings, not just the number, but the actual buildings that are available. I think that's brilliant, but I'm not sure how to achieve that. I'm not sure if we can ask that much.
Well, why does it matter? Do you have to have? Does a cannabis establishment, you can't have anyone living above it?
No,
Well, I think we revisit that in downtown business, maybe, because that would give a lot more. In fact, that was my original intention.
It is in the regs?
I think the mixed use with residential is in the regs.
I think we can change
That was
it.
a compelling comment. I think we need to look at that.
I think we can look at that.
Okay. So, that's all. I just wanted to recap.
Okay. So,
Yeah. In reference to the map, it would be most helpful, I think, if we looked at what places were allowed. We've looked at other buffer maps, and I think really let's look at what is green, and we can go forward in these areas. So I would ask that the planning board.
How do we generate that? I mean, do we just ask and it magically appears?
we have Jamie added to her 2 jobs she's already doing. 3 jobs, sorry. Official.
I don't think that I can have maps ready by Monday.
Okay.
What I'm looking at in the regulations, it was a door-to-door
Yeah.
buffer, which I don't have the capability of. I can do a buffer around a property, so.
Right.
Well, just do it around and.
So the best buffer map that I can come up with is one that will show a buffer from the edge of the property line. It won't show
What then becomes complicated is seeing what is left and how much is available, and I think really if you look at where it is, I can assist, Jamie. I can help out with this.
Okay.
I was imagine that.
The other thing we have to remember with the residential issue is that that eliminates Main Street.
Maybe
does.
Jeff will be back by
Yeah.
then.
So
So let's,
if we were able to change that to downtown business, it might.
are we,
I think we need a plan with that, and we need to set someone in charge of it to make sure that all this talent gets pulled in and it actually happens. I don't think we can just leave it with, well, someone's gonna help. We need a plan.
Yeah,
Well,
for
for
people
what?
that volunteered to help Jamie, get with Jamie before you leave.
well, I mean, I think Jamie, at best, if you can do the property line one with a 350 and a 500 so we can see that, with the understanding that I think the door-to-door will likely be more permissive
More
than
permissive.
the buffer, so we'll know that that's kind of a worst case, best case, depending on your perspective of what that is. And if we have some way in the interim that you can do a door-to-door with some help from someone, then that'd be great, but I think that,
I think that's too much to ask for now.
Do have a
I
measure
think
wheel.
from Jamie it is.
Yeah,
Not,
it is.
not,
There's
not
some
by, not by
progress.
Monday.
Yeah,
Yeah, like GIS.
But if someone were to approach Jamie and offer to provide such information.
that would be great.
That'd be great.
So, are people generally available for Monday?
Monday's fine with me.
Sure.
What
Don't
time?
we have a 27
Six?
meeting?
We have a meeting on Tuesday
We have a
already
meeting
about the
on
chicken
Tuesday about
coops.
chicken
but
That's all right. We can.
We'll just
you
come here
guys,
every
you guys are
night.
good company.
Come here every night until we're done with everything.
So, I'm sorry, 6
That's
o'clock on
Monday the
Monday?
26th.
I would say Monday the 26th at 6.
A motion to continue this public hearing on
No.
the recreational marijuana zoning amendment until Monday the 26th at 6 p.m.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Can I have a motion from the ordinance subcommittee to continue until Monday, the 26th at 6 p.m.?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're good to go. See you
right.
Monday.
Thank you, everybody. We really do appreciate you coming.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks
Got a
a
little more
lot.
business.
We're
not done yet.
Okay, we're not done yet, folks, so let's do a really.
Let's just ignore them and zip
Planning
right
board.
through it.
Planning board, just quickly.
Planning
Chris.
board meeting is still continuing.
Excuse me, folks.
Excuse me.
We
The
still have
planning
a
board
little.
meeting is still
Folks,
ongoing.
excuse me. Shh. We still have a planning board meeting. We just got a couple things to tie up, so if you can take your conversations outside, that'd be great. The only thing left on here is request for opinions from the ZBA regarding 2 special permits, which historically we do not opine upon.
I've read them both of those, and I recommend that for both ZBA requests, we offer our recommendation is no recommendation at this time.
Yeah, I second that. Yeah, I read them too. I didn't see any
I
issue.
recommend that we don't
All right.
recommend.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. See you
Good
Monday.
job, Jesse.
So, yeah, motion to adjourn?
Oh, so moved.
Okay.